Hey everybody, it's the Kiwi Cat Gamer. As you might have guessed, this video is going to have major spoilers for Undertale and Undertale Yellow. If you haven't played either of these games yet, and you want to experience them for the first time on your own, I highly recommend you do so, especially considering Undertale Yellow is a free game. I'll have the link in the description. Also, don't be alarmed by the length of this video. I have intentionally made sure that it can be enjoyed to the fullest extent as a purely audio experience. If you want to be doing something else while you listen, I implore you to do so. God knows that's how I prefer to listen to my video essays. All you'd be missing is some gameplay and maybe some subtitles for dialogue, and that's about it. I'll try to make chapters so that if you need to leave and come back later, it's easy to do so. I hope you enjoy. It's not often that I experience fan content of something I enjoy that is so high quality that it makes me reconsider the quality of the original content. This was the position I recently found myself in when I played the Genocide route of Undertale Yellow, a fan game released 8 years after Undertale. And I'd like to be specific about that. The Genocide route. Without going into too much detail, for now, I can say with certainty that, for the most part, Yellow and Classic are pretty evenly made for their respective true and neutral runs. Yellow does a great job of feeling authentically Undertale and tells a prequel story so compelling that I wish all of the Fallen Children had their own story in a similar vein and with similar dedication to telling a quality and meaningful story through the medium of video games in as creative a way as the game it was based on. It wasn't until I played Yellow's Genocide run that I suddenly realized something I had never really considered in the many hours of playing and replaying all of Undertale's endings. Undertale's Genocide run is bad. Not just flawed, but actively poor quality in terms of its ability to tell a story, entertain the player, and make the player feel anything at all. And this revelation only came from how incredible Undertale Yellow's execution of that same concept was. Now, I understand such an immediately polarized view of Undertale might elicit negative reactions from you all, ranging from, I already thought Undertale was garbage, its Genocide run included, to Undertale's Genocide run is peak, and you're just bad because you can't fight Sans. It's really hard to discuss a cultural landmark like Undertale without the presence, or at least the assumption of the presence, of bias. So, perhaps a better dose of copium to take if Undertale's Genocide run is bad is too sensational for you. A better way to phrase it might be, Undertale's Genocide run is a product of its time. Derogatory. Maybe that works better. However you want to interpret my point is this. Undertale Yellow's Genocide run is nearly perfect, and does everything that Undertale's Genocide run wanted to do, but actually accomplishes it. And to prove my point, let's walk through, exhaustively, the elements of each. Let's begin with the most boring aspect of these games, in my opinion, but the aspect that is most noticeable, especially when you play the Genocide run. The gameplay. For the maybe 10 of you in existence who did not heed my warning and are continuing to watch even though you don't know anything about Undertale, the Genocide run goes like this. Every zone has a set number of encounters to kill. Every time you kill an encounter, you gain EXP. After getting enough EXP, your LV increases. When we talk about the story, the purpose of spelling those letters out loud will make sense. In a Genocide run, you cannot move on to the next zone until you have already killed every single encounter in that zone, and then the boss, without sparing any monster. After enough killed monsters, saving and healing at the save points will tell you how many more monsters remain before you've wiped out the zone. If it sounds very straightforward, that's because it is. It's intentionally built to parody the gameplay loop of RPGs like Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger, and of course, Earthbound. It's a postmodern RPG. It puts a twist by limiting the number of encounters, as if to imply that each zone is a lived-in location that you're thinning out with every exclamation point over your head, which plays into how the gameplay in general bridges the narrative, and for that matter, the entire premise of the game, because it contextualizes what grinding actually is. Grinding for better loot isn't just going out into a field and killing imps until you have enough gold to buy a better sword so you can kill imps faster. It's genocide, and eventually when you've reached the limit of encounters, the game gives you encounters just to remind you that you've succeeded in killing everything in the zone, resulting in the realization to the player that their actions have consequences. Or at least, that's probably what Toby Fox intended by this Genocide gameplay loop. In practice, this process is absolutely not something someone could accidentally do, in large part because the game is designed to be absolutely beatable at LV1, so the average player would likely not see any reason to really grind up, even if they grind only for a little bit. which is a beautiful gameplay mechanic for a narrative about being kind to people and learning that the differences that we have don't make us enemies, and that even decades and generations of violence and oppression can be overlooked by just one act of kindness and one determined heart to fix all of the wrongs of the past. But when that gameplay mechanic is also being used to serve a different narrative in the same exact game about how evil and despicable and horrible you as a person are for choosing to do all of these things, it doesn't make a lot of sense, because the player would never choose to do any of that. That's not really my main issue. More an observation about how the gameplay loop presents the idea of the genocide from strictly a gameplay perspective. The only reason you would think to kill every single monster is if you knew that doing so gave you a different outcome, as the intentional ominous tone of X left after you've killed like 5 or so monsters would either instantly scare off a new player or encourage a new player who is already intent on grinding to the max level anyway. In the latter case, such a player would probably not be very resonant to the theme that's trying to be presented to them in the Genocide run to begin with, but more on that later. My issue is the way this process is carried out. In short, it requires, or at the very least encourages, you to mindlessly march around in circles until you have found every encounter. As you kill more and more monsters, they become harder and harder to encounter, giving the implication that they're running, or perhaps hiding, from the player. But in practice, it's just making the Genocide run a massive ordeal to complete. In the last cell, Hotland, there's a conveyor belt that you can walk on infinitely to try to get encounters, with less effort, but it's still 40 monsters with anywhere from 1 to 3 minutes between encounters. This area alone could be 2 hours if you're unlucky, with the only saving grace being that sometimes monsters will double or triple up in encounters, saving you some time. At the time, I accepted this as both intended and optimal as far as bridging gameplay to narrative is concerned, as I'm sure the defenders of Undertale's Genocide run feel as I speak. The idea is that you must be determined to complete the Genocide run, an intentional choice of word that I will go into more depth on when we discuss the narrative, but for now, just accept that word at face value. Determination, firmness of purpose, the unwillingness to give up in the face of any obstacle. Sure, it bridges that concept, but it's kind of meaningless to do so if, in communicating that idea that the player is determined, the gameplay also inadvertently, or perhaps intentionally but misguidedly, as I'll discuss later, disconnects the player from the idea that these monsters are people, which is what this system is meant to accomplish in the first place. What also really doesn't help this feeling of disassociation is the fact that you never feel any more powerful. Sure, a damage number might go up from 3 to 4 and your LV increases, and you might get more health, but so does every encounter in each new zone. Again, a clear parody of the monotonous gameplay loop of conventional RPGs, but it's once again at odds with the other gameplay expectation that my actions as a player have consequences in terms of the humanity of the monsters that I fight. In a conventional RPG like Final Fantasy, early game enemies are both weaker and less imposing visually, so your reward for grinding in those games becomes these enemies are more challenging, more interesting to look at, and drop better stuff, so therefore more fun to fight. And you could sit around in any Final Fantasy game and grind the first room of enemies until you're max level, and indeed, people have, but that isn't fun to do because the gameplay loop encourages you to find tougher enemies to fight against. Undertale fights with itself in this aspect because it is, at the same time, trying to parody the gameplay loop of conventional RPGs by having you grind enemies over and over, but also trying to convince you not to by making enemies more and more scarce the more that you kill them. Then, as a final confounding decision, enemies gain more health and defense proportional to you and the gear that you pick up, with the understanding that you could also be playing a neutral or pacifist route so that if you suddenly decided to fight on from this point, the enemies would be very, very hard. It sounds like I'm just describing every RPG scaling, but that really isn't the case. The key moment in the conventional loop is the being stronger part, because that is the resolution to the grinding part. Without the numbers reflecting how much stronger I am, it might as well not go up at all. The only reason my LV goes up is to follow the convention in that one specific way, which makes no sense to follow if you aren't going to follow any of the other conventions. Finally, each zone ends in its respective boss, which I will go into more specific detail about each one in the next section. As far as gameplay alone is concerned, this is where Undertale shines, and is what it's best known for. The bullet hell turn-based combat is lauded, and for good reason. Even after all these years, it is still the strongest part of the game, and really the only reason anyone cares about the Genocide run. Were it not for the promise of some unseen content, nobody would have wanted to go through the tedium I described before. And even in this, its strongest aspect, Undertale struggles with its adherence and aversion to convention. Of the bosses in this game, one of them actually has a health bar. Every other one dies in one hit, usually as a result of a big number being dealt to them as damage. This only really works if the player is placated by the sight of a big number, but in reality, it's scripted. For every one of these one-hit bosses, you could have the weakest weapon equipped and it would still do the same amount of damage as if you had the strongest. Which begs the question then, why even have better gear and why even have bosses if it's a glorified cutscene? This is something I'll answer later, but I want to allow the question to sit with you as we continue. The boss that does have a health bar has such high defense that it might as well be a scripted number of attacks, since no matter which of the two weapons you find in that area you choose to equip, it doesn't change how long the fight will take. In summary, Undertale's gameplay loop seems like it's too concerned with selling the novelty of what it's conveying without paying mind to how that novelty conflicts with the story it's trying to tell through its gameplay. The story it wants to tell is, oh, look at how messed up it is that gamers will kill swarms and swarms of monsters and not give it a second thought. When the story the gameplay actually tells is, look at how boring RPGs are when you take away the fun part of grinding. As far as the bare bones of the gameplay goes, Undertale Yellow is pretty much identical in concept, and even has the same relationship with conventional RPGs as Undertale. That being that it intentionally draws the player's attention to the usual disconnect between killing hordes of mobs and what that action actually means. There are two key differences that Yellow employs which serve to make the gameplay of its Genocide that much more impactful. The first major difference is that each screen in each zone has a set number of encounters. Instead of needing to hunt down 40 monsters over the course of the whole of Hotland, now you only just need to hunt down 4 monsters per screen across 10 screens. This isn't exactly the exchange rate, but you get the idea. This small change conveys this parody of convention much more eloquently because it actually becomes a hunt. It's no longer just walking around in a circle for 1 to 3 minutes hoping for an exclamation point. It is an active count to an achievable number in every room. Someone just playing for the first time might accidentally clear a room if they were just interested in grinding, and might be intrigued to see the "but nobody came" message. And it accomplishes this without sacrificing its precious concept of determination, because you're still reminded of the total numbers of monsters that you need to find, and still have to check every room for about 1 to 3 minutes to make sure that you've killed everything in that room. Number still goes up, and monsters still get killed. There is nothing functionally different about the gameplay aspect other than that the number of monsters is also now limited by room. The second major difference is that you gain new abilities and noticeably stronger weapons as the game continues. Between bosses, who are all full bosses, I should add, none of this one-hit nonsense, there is a gradual, very clear progression of the power you wield. The bullet upgrades actually make a difference in numbers that appears, with passive abilities that actually make you consider whether doing significantly less damage is worth the bonus it gives you. Not to mention the yellow mode you get about 2/3 into the game. The simple act of making the player feel stronger does so much more to demonstrate what Undertale was trying to communicate, but failed. That you're an unstoppable force that will only get more and more powerful. But at what cost? These are really very small quality of life changes to make to such an established formula, to elicit such a massive change in tone and intention, but they are the changes that need to be made to make Undertale's gameplay work for this particular playstyle. And finally, we can talk about the fun part, the story. Full disclosure, I originally wanted to split this section into 2 parts, being presentation and plot, but it became difficult to separate the two, specifically in Undertale's case. That might have something to do with how Undertale's Genocide run is only tangentially related to the main story of Undertale, so the presentation of the run is how the story is told, as opposed to the other 2 endings which tell most of its story by dialogue and leave deeper details to be interacted with by the presentation. By presentation, I'm referring to strictly how the game is presented. The music, the character design, the attack patterns, all these aspects are just as critical to telling the story of Undertale's, and Yellow's, Genocide run as anything else. Without any context of what is happening in the actual plot, you should be able to listen to music, watch a fight, or just see a picture of an enemy in any given scenario and have some idea of what is trying to be conveyed in that moment. I felt this distinction to be necessary to discuss, but doing so separately from the plot ended up being too confusing. There were a lot of holes that didn't get filled until I actually discussed what was happening at that point, and then I had to say a lot of, remember when I talked about the presentation back here? So I've just decided that I'm going to implant where I talk about presentation in the spots that I would have logically talked about them in the course of the narrative. If that makes this next section feel unfocused, it's because it was twice as incomprehensible otherwise. The story of Undertale at large is as follows. Long ago, there lived humans and monsters. They once lived in peace until something caused them to go to war with each other. The humans so brutally overpowered the monsters that they stood no chance and were cast into the underground, where humans put up a barrier to lock the monsters in that can only be broken by the power of 7 human souls. It is many, many years later, and a 7th child falls down, where the story, regardless of our path, begins. This opening does a good job of establishing the parody concept I described in gameplay, but narratively. That is to say that this opening is just generic enough that without knowing anything else about Undertale, you could liken this plot to something that you probably do know, like Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest. You're a silent protagonist who finds themselves in a setting unusual or unknown at the most important time of its existence, and have to find your way back because it's the only thing you know. There is also a strong enough expectation that you'll face adversity, because it's established that these monsters would want to take your human soul, the significance of which is explored later, but for now, can be understood as simply the MacGuffin needed to escape the underground. Like a standard run, we wake up in the bed of flowers, make our way into the first hallway, and we are introduced to Flowey, who is intentionally designed to be unassuming and friendly, while his music is both infantile and slightly unsettling, perfectly complementing the uneasy tone of where you are, and ultimately leading to his immediate betrayal of you and the utterance of the most impactful line of dialogue in this run. In this world, it's kill or be killed. Which, as far as I'm concerned, is where the Genocide run technically starts. I'll get into why this is later, but for now, just assume that this is where a player might make up their mind about how to traverse the underground. We are then introduced to Toriel, who takes us in and tries to teach us that we can treat monsters with respect and mercy. In a normal run, this is intended to be where we are taught the gimmick mechanic of the game, that being that you're not supposed to kill encounters, but spare them, which is already where the presentation of the Genocide run begins to crumble. We are about a minute into this game. We have met 2 characters so far. One who is very obviously designed to be deceptive and cruel and malicious, and who immediately betrays us and then tells us we should kill everything we see. Another character who is overwhelmingly loving and kind and tells us that we don't need to do that. And just look at the enemies we encounter. Timid frogs, shy fairies, these ugly creatures who get bullied, vegetables. None of these enemies scream, "I am going to fight and kill you." They are beautifully and wonderfully designed to be unassuming and pathetic, which is great for a game about sparing things, but it leaves the fallen child, and by extension the player, no logical reason to kill monsters. The only thing we have to go off of is that monsters are all evil and want to harm us. That one idea was thrown away in the first minute by there being no monster besides Flowey that harbors even the slightest intent to harm us, and yet we are expected to listen to Flowey's advice. But, for the sake of this video, we have to assume, for the sake of argument, that somehow we, the player, have reasoned that these monsters are just pretending to be pathetic and weak, and actually are very powerful and trying to lure me into a false sense of security or something. The alternative conclusion is, well, we'll get to what the alternative conclusion is by the end of the ruins. Just keep operating for now under the assumption that I'm trying to roleplay and have found a good reason to keep going through with the Genocide. Now is also a good time to mention that as you commit to the Genocide run, the music begins to distort and become more sinister and warped, until it eventually becomes this horrible droning rumble. This sound that plays is actually Flowey's theme slowed down to an incredible extent, which is a really cool choice, as he is so far our only logical reason to pursue this path. Maybe it's like his words, kill or be killed, echoing through our minds or something. Additionally, these save points, which when you first interact with them depict some scene which ends with fills you with determination, once you have killed all the monsters, is replaced with just the word determination. A word which I promise I will elaborate on the significance of, but for now, just keep it in mind. Regardless, when we finally get to Toriel, she does not comment on how empty the ruins have become, and like in a normal run, brings us to an old, unused kids' room and bakes us a pie. It should be noted that specifically in the Genocide run, looking at the toys and stuff in the room forces a perspective of disinterest, saying things like, I have no interest in these toys whatsoever, and this painting looks old, or something like that. Again, as is typical for a normal run, you insist to Toriel that you want to leave this place, but she wants to keep you here, where it is obviously safe and pretty cozy. Once again, I find it hard to imagine a role-playing reason in my role-playing game to harbor any murderous intent towards Toriel, but we'll just have to assume that this fallen child is horribly paranoid and thinks they're in like a Hansel and Gretel situation or something, where it's only a matter of time before Toriel kills and steals your soul, as obviously unlikely as such a thing is, given how she is presented to be warm, kind, loving, and a mother figure who would never want you to get hurt. So, you follow her into the basement where she outright tells you that she plans to keep you here and for your own good. That there is no way for her to protect you when you leave this place, and she wants nothing more than for you to be safe with her, just like she tried to do for the 6 other humans that fell down here. And finally, she says that Asgore will kill you if you leave, and that it is best to just avoid violence altogether. In a normal run, this is a pretty compelling conundrum, because on the one hand, you now have a very clear picture of monsters being miserable and sad here underground, and that the only way to save them would be for you to die. Or you could choose to live in this Sisyphusian nightmare where you choose to stay where you're trapped with everyone else. But, unfortunately for a Genocide run, none of that matters. And this is where I drop the facade of us having a reasonable role-playing reason to do a Genocide run. In order for us to be on a Genocide run, at least one of these things must be true. 1. We have already played Undertale and just want to see what happens when we kill everybody. 2. We have understood the intended tone and message of the game from the start and are intentionally acting counter to it for no other reason than to spite it. And 3. We are completely callous to the entire narrative of the game and are playing this game like it's a normal RPG such as Final Fantasy. And for any of those to be true, we have to not care at all about any of this beautifully presented narrative in any way. Which sounds like it could be intentional, like a statement that those who kill mindlessly and are violent are unhinged and deranged, but it shoots itself in the foot by being so blatant. From the very start, this idea chokes on Flowey. If I am not expected and not supposed to care, then why have Flowey tell me kill or be killed in the first place? If I'm supposed to listen to Flowey, why bother letting me talk to Toriel in the first place? Toriel proves to a role-playing player instantly that Flowey's words are lies, born of cruelty. Even if the player doesn't intend on being a true pacifist, it would be absolutely impossible to walk away from the ruins without at least acknowledging that some monsters are worth sparing, if for no other reason than they were kind to you. So, from the very beginning, to engage with the Genocide run as Toby Fox expected me to engage with it, I have to not care about the story at all. None of the story, none of its characters, which is bizarre and not quite the statement I think Toby Fox wanted it to be. I'll go deeper into this concept as we continue, but at least for now you can understand the confusion that this would cause in someone trying to engage with this story. And before you try to argue something like, oh well, I'm just role-playing as a fallen child who wants to kill all the monsters. That's not really how role-playing works. People do roleplay like that, but that's not how it's supposed to work. If you have a game that has an established world, role-playing is supposed to be your chance to play the role of a character that exists within that world. Take a game like Mass Effect. This is a role-playing game where your choices matter, you have an impact on how the character interacts with the world, and you can choose to be evil. The core difference is, Shepard is a character and has motivations outside of your will as the player. Sure, it's your will as the player that quote-unquote convinces him to do that evil thing, but it is still based on information that you, the player, have witnessed through Shepard's eyes in universe. Like, sure, Shepard sees a guy on the side of a skyscraper and needs to get information from him, and the guy doesn't want to give that information to Shepard. You, as the player, witness through Shepard's eyes that, hey, I can push him off and he'll die, and I won't have to deal with this guy anymore, as indicated by the little renegade thing that pops up in the corner. You, as the player, it is your will that imposes on Shepard to do that evil thing, and therefore, the thing is done, and Shepard is evil as a result. Which leads to some very impactful moments in Mass Effect, where the evil actions that I do suddenly have in-universe consequences, and Shepard, as a character, reacts and gathers information, which then I, as the player, have to impose will to interact with. Suddenly, there is no disconnect between me and Shepard because the things that we know and the things that we want to happen slowly and slowly become one. Because every choice that I make that turns Shepard more and more evil, if I want him to be evil, that is the outcome that I want. If there is no exchange of information between what the character knows and wants and what I know and want, there might as well be no connection between me and the character. Because for me to have a connection with the character, I have to look at something the character does and go, yes, I would also react to that information this way, and this is how I would act in that situation. We don't know anything about this fallen child, which is beautiful in a game where I have to be kind because everything is set up for me to be kind and for me to care about things. Because if I was the child in that situation, I would go, oh wow, Toriel's great. She really cares about me, and I'm really sad that I have to fight her in this situation. But if that's not how I'm gonna react, that's the information that's presented to me and to the child, but I don't want to do that. I want to genocide. Why am I genociding? Because I'm playing a video game. Because I'm not actually engaging with the story. I have to not care. I'm getting heated. That whole rant was not in the script at all. I talk about this to conclusion at the very end when I talk about this, but I gotta move on. So let's run it back. Start at Flowey, kill or be killed, Toriel, hunt down every monster, kill him, determination, back to the basement. We get to Toriel, who at this point we have no love or sympathy for because she's just pixels. She demands that we prove that we're strong enough to face the outside world, and one-hit kill. And she says, "You really hate me that much. Now I see who I was protecting by keeping you here. Not you, but them." Now, if I cared, this would be an emotionally resonant scene. Here is a woman who wanted nothing more than to love and to care for us. She had her blindness and her flaws, but she loved us, or at the very least could have come to love us. And we killed her when she was at her most vulnerable. This one-hit kill thing only happens during a genocide run. It's not like I could accidentally do this in a neutral or pacifist run. In order to get that specific interaction, that just deep, that just dripping with emotion, specific interaction, I would have needed to intentionally chose to kill every single monster up to that point, which, as I have established, makes no sense to do if I care about the narrative of this story. If I did care enough about this scene to realize how emotionally significant it was, I wouldn't be doing this in the first place. I wouldn't have seen it in the first place. Do you see now how being forced and conditioned to not care about the narrative robbed this moment of its depth? Because I, the player, have already been conditioned to not care? And before you argue something like, well, what if I am just experiencing it just to see what happens, but I'm still appreciating the emotional depth? No, you are still in the camp of not caring about the story because things don't just happen in stories for you to witness them, especially not in video games. They happen so that you can reflect on them, and especially in games like this, where you can change your behavior from that point on. And because the gameplay is so tedious and intentional about how you have to get this particular interaction, there's no way that you would get to this point, see this interaction, and then decide, oh yeah, I don't want to do a genocide run anymore. That was too much for me. Because someone who hasn't made up their mind about going through with an entire genocide run wouldn't get up to the point where they would even started a genocide run. So, after leaving there, feeling nothing, we reunite with Flowey, who is impressed with how evil we are and calls us soulless, and also drops a hint that he is also without a soul. And then comes Okay, so I skipped at the beginning that you get to name your character. A pretty innocuous detail to skip over, but it carries significance now that we're first being introduced to meta content. This isn't necessarily unusual to postmodern RPGs. Earthbound did it, and everyone after Undertale has done it since, but it's important to note that the naming screen doesn't say, enter your name, it says, name the fallen child at the start before I'm encouraged to not care. I think the average person would put their name or something that they associate with themselves because that's what you do in a video game that asks your name. And this is the first time that someone actually uses that name. Otherwise, they are just find something else to call you, like kid or friend. The Genocide run makes extensive use of this name that you entered, for reasons I'll get into towards the end, but it's this first interaction which sows the seeds of what I consider to be the biggest blunder and product of its time derogatory thing that this game does with the story. Flabby refers to you by your name and says something implying you two have met before and that you two will continue to work together. Flabby then insists to destroy everything in this wretched world. Everyone, everything, and these worthless memories. Let's turn them all to dust. And there, ladies and gentlemen, we've been given our first taste of the edgy creepypasta that is Undertale's Genocide run. Yep, that's what this is. Edgy creepypasta, early 2000s edgy creepypasta, complete with referring to the player by their name and wanting to kill everything just because I can. Horribly shallow, horribly overdone, and so painfully unoriginal compared to how masterfully the actual game is in terms of narrative. But most of all, it confirms what I've asserted already, that we, the player, are encouraged not to care about these monsters or their problems in any way. That we're just supposed to kill everything without thinking because that's what we, the player, want to do apparently. Never mind that this is supposed to be a role-playing game and I should be role-playing as the fallen child. No. Flowey spells it out for us in some uncertain terms, I suppose, but we are the player, puppeting around this child to kill all these cutesy monsters because we, the player, are evil soulless bastards who don't care about the lives of these monsters. We continue to Snowden. Snowden is more of the same gameplay-wise. It's nearly identical in process other than the number of enemies you need to kill, as discussed in the gameplay section. The enemies you kill here are no more menacing, but at this point, we don't care about that. And by the way, I'm sure you're going to get tired of me saying, but we're not supposed to care or similar things, so anytime that I'm referring to that, I'm just going to say the implication, used as follows. We can pretty much be certain that every new area in this game will attempt to make us feel sad for killing these friendly, pathetic, and/or kind monsters, but we can't and won't because of the implication. Which is a shame, because Snowden specifically has one or two key differences in exploration in the Genocide run that, were it not for the implication, would be chilling. No pun intended. Speaking of puns, it's time for the main guy that everyone knows and loves. Practically the entire reason to even do the Genocide run. It's Sans Undertale, and he is not happy that we're doing the Genocide run, as he also seems to know that we are up to something. He serves as the second of three characters that are capable of breaking the fourth wall in this way, and oh boy, I have a lot to say about him, but let's give him his own section when the time comes. In the meantime, he's presented in a starkly different way than in a normal run. He's very ominous and serious. He does the thing where his eyes go completely black and he says threatening things to us like, "You're not gonna like what happens," or "You want an advice for fighting my brother? Don't." Things that if you had only played a neutral or pacifist run would be very surprised, but, you know, the implication. Papyrus, on the other hand, does not seem to grasp the gravity of this situation and treats this as a normal run. You know, I actually find this annoying. An annoying difference because he doesn't treat it as a normal run. In a Genocide run, the puzzles get expedited, and Papyrus has a cheeky sense of like self-awareness that his puzzles are there to waste time. It's annoying because, well, obviously the implication, but also it feels pretty out of character for Papyrus to behave this way. Let's assume we don't know what he's like in a normal run for a second. In the Genocide run, disregarding the implication, of course, he is a completely unserious loser who does not seem to have any intention towards killing you and instead convinces himself that he would rather be friends with a human. A human, I should mention, whom he knows is a murderer, or at least by reputation that humans are completely fine with killing monsters. If this was the only impression someone had of Papyrus, it would be extremely different from that of a normal run. Not that we care, of course, the implication and all that, but this isn't for our sake that I point this out, it's for his sake. Papyrus is a character who is ambitious to a fault. A character who wants so badly to be in the Royal Guard, he would literally give his life to do it. He considers being friends with the human in a normal run, but it's only after the human displays a general approval of how Papyrus has been treating them, and after Papyrus tried to apprehend them. Him suddenly deciding out of nowhere to just fold and be our friend, especially in this scenario, feels insulting to my intelligence and to his integrity as a character. Toby wants so badly to break the implication that he made for us. He constantly struggles between, you shouldn't care about anything if you want to do the genocide run, because if you had any of the motivation besides being a murder hobo, you wouldn't find any. And why are you doing a genocide run? Look at how friendly and nice everyone's being, you evil bastard! If he's stuck with one or the other the whole way through, I would say it's genius, but it isn't. It comes off as sloppy, insulting, and really juvenile. Imagine for a second a scenario where Papyrus does have you actually do all the puzzles and do all the spaghetti stuff. Actually go through with all of it, make you solve all the puzzles. Suddenly, there is a plausible reason why this character, who at this point has been killing everything, there's a plausible reason for them to go like, I want to kill Papyrus. Because they're annoying. He's annoying. He's an annoying character. In an actual run, he's a really annoying character. So lean into him being annoying. Lean into him being just completely unredeemably annoying. And I want to fight you, I can apprehend you. Not knowing how much more powerful you are than Papyrus. Because when you finally get to the fight, it'll be so satisfying that this super arrogant, super annoying, super cocky, annoying bastard of a character just gets demolished in one hit. You go, yes! Yes, I feel something because I killed this annoying character who's been annoying me this entire section. It's also here that we're introduced to the mechanic of stealing from the shop. I've never really understood what the point of doing this is besides being evil. You steal every item for free anyway, so what good is stealing money other than, oh, look at how evil and monstrous you are. But, and say it with me now, the implication doesn't have room for that. If I cared about stealing and didn't have justification for doing it, I wouldn't be doing it. This mechanic would be way more impactful if stealing was a choice in a normal run, because then the choice is no longer a mandatory consequence specifically of the genocide run. Like, let's say in a normal run, I choose to steal a honey bun from the lady that sells them, and she gets mad and kicks me out, and then I'm never allowed in that store again, so I can't buy healing items, and everyone in town is a little bit cross with me because I stole, so maybe, people have different dialogue or something. Better yet, maybe there's like a special item that boosts your attack or boosts your defense or something like meaningful that you can only get by stealing. And in a pacifist run, where you would never even think to be mean to anybody, you're not going to get that item, but you're curious about it. So maybe you're like, I kind of want to do a genocide run, or a run where I'm just a little bit evil. And, you go and you steal it, and you reap the rewards from it. Suddenly, there's a reason to steal, because there's a natural correlation of being evil gets you stuff, people don't like you for it. In a genocide run, where no one is going to like you anyway because you kill them, it doesn't matter. So your reward for a genocide run becomes, look how much more powerful you are for fully committing to be evil, as opposed to just half-assing being evil. Anyway, Papyrus fight. He wants to be our friend, as I sort of spoiled earlier. He really wants to be our friend. He says, I believe in you. You can change. One hit kill. And he says he believes in us, blah, 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 the implication. This is the second boss fight we've encountered, and it's still a one-shot kill. The next area is the waterfall, and I could go into the exact same thing about how monsters don't instill anything, but they're pathetic and whatever. Instead, I kind of want to skip ahead in the narrative to talk about something that's kind of crucial to the best moment in the genocide run. At this point, someone who hasn't played Undertale watching this might be very confused on a point I made a while ago. How did humans beat monsters so badly? The answer is a mix of assertions made from the very small information about the soul and some information you learn only in the true pacifist run, though, I should mention. Inside every human soul are 8 traits. justice, represented by yellow, kindness, represented by green, perseverance, represented by purple, integrity, represented by blue, bravery, represented by orange, patience, represented by cyan, and determination, technically represented by red, but not officially. While each of these traits exist within all humans, each human soul has one particular trait that dominates it. Of these traits, determination is considered to be the strongest, as it allows the human soul to hold itself together even after death. Among other humans, the difference in determination is pretty minimal, especially the more humans that there are, and doesn't have much effect on anything. But among monsters, it is enormous. In some cases, particularly where a human soul is dominated by determination, a human's determination can be powerful enough that they can even turn back time to specific points where their determination was the highest. If there are multiple humans surrounded by the presence of monsters, it is the human with the higher determination who controls this particular effect. It's pretty much solely because of how powerful determination is that humans could demolish monsters, and why, in this case, one single human whose heart is mostly fueled by determination is single-handedly genociding every single monster. The only hope for monsters is that if a human is killed, a boss monster, which is a specific kind of monster that is by nature more powerful than the others, can absorb that human soul, gaining their strength and powers. At some point, the king's son was killed, and in an effort to revive him, the king funded his scientists to extract determination from a human soul and place it into a monster's body. The result of which only temporarily worked, as any monster that isn't a boss monster or a human can't handle the amount of power that is within human determination. So it only temporarily worked, granting them a human's power briefly before their bodies just melted away. The project was scrapped, and the only person who knows about it is the present-day royal scientist, Alphys, who hides away with the amalgamations of those melted corpses created by the experiment. In other words, determination is not just a literal word to describe a feeling, it's also a power source that exists in universe, that exists within all humans and which manifests in our characters specifically. It is strongly implied that the save points are moments for our soul to speak to us, and when we have accomplished our tasks of killing every monster in an area, our soul resonates with determination. At the very end, I will express some grievance with this idea, but for now, let's get back to Waterfall. At the waterfall, we encounter Monster Kid, who you already know the implication, blah blah blah. Nothing about Monster Kid's character changes in the Genocide run, which just makes Papyrus's change so weird to me. Like, imagine a scenario where suddenly Monster Kid becomes smart. In a normal run, he's just this moron who does not understand that you're a human. But imagine, in this case, that Monster Kid is, like, immediately aware that you are a human and starts to, like, just run from you the second he sees you. There's suddenly, a reason as a player to be like, yeah, I want to hunt down and kill this, like, named monster that I can see that's running from me. I want to engage with the Genocide run and make them fear me. I want to kill them. I want to make them fear me. So why not make Monster Kid just this, like, scared kid who understands that we're a villain right from the start? They kind of do something like this. At the very end, when it's a little bit too late for that. The bridge, where we are right now. Monster Kid asks us to prove that we're not evil, and then the moment that we refuse to do so, it's too late. He goes like, oh, I'll stand and fight you because that's what Undyne would do. As much as I was just harping on this 1 second ago, I actually do really like this. It's the first time in the Genocide run that we actually carry out the action, and one that makes sense to be a one-hit kill. I mean, surely if we can kill a boss monster like Toriel in one hit, this kid should be no threat. The scared look on his face, the phrase, "in my way." It all sells for once in this entire game's runtime and unhindered by the implication that our choice to kill everything really is a commitment. Here is this child, a literal child, standing not even in our actual path. We could just walk away, but dares to defy us as the player. This surpasses the implication because it doesn't even try to appeal to how we should feel and just fully commits to you should kill this guy for no other reason than he impedes you from continuing the Genocide run. If there were more moments that committed like this, more moments that were only concerned with how would someone playing this run feel instead of how should someone actually engaging with the story feel, I would love the Genocide run as a whole. It's not just a dialogue choice to kill this kid or some off-screen animation. I have to be the one to press the attack button to time the attack, and upon doing so... Okay, another tangent, I'm so sorry. A while ago, I got into an argument online with someone about whether or not the inclusion of lyrics in Undertale's soundtrack could serve to enhance its quality. With me, probably not surprisingly given the situation, taking the more controversial of the two stances, insisting that lyrics can tell the story of the soundtrack better than the soundtrack and its context can. So, Lapis Lancer, thank you for the new and improved Kiwis. Everyone go check them out on Instagram. I'm sorry, you're just gonna have to hear my arguments for this song again if you're watching this. I think that Man on the Internet's rendition of Battle Against a True Hero tells the story of that song far, far better than the song in its own right, and especially in the context of the Genocide run, can tell it. For the simple fact of the implication. Battle Against a True Hero is a song of triumph. I don't care if you don't hear it, I don't care if it doesn't make you feel triumphant, that is just a matter of fact what this song is supposed to make you feel. The song begins with a motif played on a piano, but which sounds very similar to the chime of tubular bells. In classical music, bells often represent celebration, new beginnings, and joy, associated with things like Christmas time, church bells, clock chimes. This motif of bells is carried as the central melody of the song, while crescendo and decrescendos move around beneath, signifying a conflict. This never takes the focus away from the motif of celebration, as it still stands strong even despite all the noise around it, strengthening the idea that this is celebration in the face of some kind of adversity. In the next verse, the waterfall motif comes in. It's the motif played at the bottom of Waterfall, but this time brought to the forefront and performed faster. Not rhythmically faster, understand, lyrically faster. It gets to the idea, the conclusion of the thought, faster. As if implying that there's strength, there's bravado, there's passion behind what the ideals of Waterfall represent to the protagonist of this song. And now, these two ideas, strength from Waterfall and the bells of celebration, are played together because they are given equal focus. This continues until we finally get to the third act of this song. A new idea presented, which, when compared to the bombacity of the previous two acts, sounds much more meek and humble. A simple melody played which itself sounds lowly and defeated, as if hope and celebration of the last two acts have worn out. Then, just as suddenly as the first part of this idea began, a new voice is added to the idea. A band of trumpets representing triumph and victory and creation, as is represented in classical music. And it is with this voice of triumph that the song concludes. So, purely from a lens of musical symbology, this is a song which tells a story of triumph and strength which briefly wanes, but then triumph once again to win the day. But whose triumph? When we attempt to strike Monster Kid, Undyne takes the attack on their behalf, instantly killing her. Or so we thought. Unbeknownst to us, before this fight, Alphys had injected Undyne with determination, knowing that we would be too powerful for her to fight on her own. Such is the power of determination that even a child can easily defeat the strongest warrior monsterkind has to offer in just a single attack. But within her dwindling soul, Undyne's determination ignites, causing her to gain a human-like strength for one last fight. If only it weren't for the implication, which pretty much negates any gravity that this realization would have. Yep, there is no reason that I should care about this revelation, because, as has been very, very strongly hammered into us, it doesn't matter who our opponent is or what they believe in. If it did matter to us, if I did care that Undyne sacrificed herself and did this last-ditch effort to, protect me, if I was moved by that, I wouldn't be doing a genocide run. So all this beautiful symbolism, lost to us on account of our choosing to experience it in the first place. I don't care if you argue, but I do care. You're acting like I'm not allowed to choose this course of action and also appreciate how impactful it is. Because by that logic, you're exactly the person this game claims you to be. Asgore, for example, in a neutral run, has flawless presentation, because regardless of you being a true pacifist or neutral, you as the player can feel the gravity of the fight. The song perfectly encapsulates the frustration and anguish going through Asgore's mind as he fights, that whether you intend to spare or kill him, you are playing out the choreography of the music and the scene perfectly. Whatever thoughts you, the player, have in those moments are very likely the thoughts that the character would also be having, that exchange of information in universe. The same absolutely cannot be said for Battle Against a True Hero. So to go back to that question, whose triumph is Battle Against a True Hero about? I want to first look at this fight from the perspective of the player, me. The player, by the power of the implication, should not feel triumphant about this fight. In fact, they shouldn't feel anything. Triumph implies that there is joy and celebration in accomplishing something, but I should have no motives besides progression. If my goal was ever become the strongest or draw out Undyne, then I've missed the point of the genocide run entirely and should not be expected to continue the genocide run after killing Undyne. If there was a monster to kill to prove my strength, it would be Undyne. If ever my goal was to kill a specific person, I wouldn't have bothered with any of the dozens of monsters before her. I would have just gone straight for her. My goal had to have been from the very beginning to kill everything for no other reason than I have to. This is what determination, lowercase, is. The triumph portrayed in this song can't be mine, so it must be Undyne's, right? But what does she have to be triumphant about in the context of what we know about her? Even in this fight, she knows it's a fight that will, at best, result in both of their deaths. She hasn't triumphed over anything until she's killed you, and even then, it will be her last triumph. It seems unlikely that a song would so strongly insist upon not just triumph, but a victorious triumph would end in her failure, let alone the fact that we are obligated to win. There's no way we can see the world after Undyne kills us, so it can't be about her triumph because she doesn't triumph. In the context of the music in its isolation, it is a song which tells the story of a powerful hero standing against an evil and completely overpowering him, only briefly failing, but then rising to the occasion and winning the day. In the context of the battle, it's a song that neither person can hear or feel, because its message doesn't apply to either party. The character can't feel triumph, and Undyne won't feel triumph. But the musical rendition. Man on the Internet's musical rendition connects the dots and gives voice to Undyne to show that it is indeed her triumph, but a hollow one. Lyrics which defy the message of the song, but in doing so, expand what the song actually means, what the music of the song actually is implying.
Right now, everyone in the world, I can feel their hearts beating as one! And we all have one goal! To defeat you, human. No, whatever you are. For the sake of the whole world, I, Undyne, will strike you down! You're gonna have to try a little harder than that! You spilled blood, you thought it easy, you thought it fun. Now I found out, now your reign of terror's done.
I have heard many complaints as I try to defend this song that, oh, the lyrics are cringe because they are literally just saying what she is doing and how she's feeling, blatantly spelling out how she feels instead of trying to convey it in some more poetic way, which is a completely bizarre complaint to have about a character who has never been poetic in a situation which does not call for it in any way.
Of the wind, echoes of your sin, sings of hopes and dreams that one day might have been. Now I rise again, this will be your end. You will never break my determination.
Man on the Internet's rendition of this song, while it obviously isn't canon to the game, is, as far as I'm concerned, the only thing which redeems the genocide run, and this fight in particular, because it makes Undyne into a tragic, but triumphant, martyr, instead of just a barbarian who misread the situation and thought she could win. The lyrics take us through her frantic and profoundly emotional last thoughts as she fights this creature she knows to be completely unstoppable. Her thoughts jumping wildly from reminders of why she fights, to curses at the human for their existence, to prayers that she'll be able to avenge everyone that's died. The whole scene is only intensified by the singer's excellent performance, stirring emotion and singing as if at the brink of tears at the music which once told a story of grand triumph, but now becomes the final proud dirge of a martyr. Especially at the end of the third act of the song is that clear, where it shifts from our to we instead of me and my, implying that she knows at that point that she's lost, but with her final condemnation of the human asserts that she's already triumphed over the human morally. She is the true hero, and with her death comes the death of all that is good and just in the world. And don't you dare say something to me like, "You wasted all this time talking about a facet of the game that isn't even canon." Shut up with that. My point is that could very well have been the story that was presented to me. It might as well be the story that was presented to me, because it doesn't matter what the story was. There's the implication in place. Without the musical, I would, and did before I saw the musical, write this fight and song off as like, oh, it's just a cool boss fight and, you know, a cool second phase and the music is kind of cool and nothing else. Because the implication. But because someone actually took the time to tell the story of the game in a way that I can actually connect to, with the actual exchange of my thoughts and my perspective actually mattering to this song, it became a story that I can recognize now how tragic it is that Toby refused to tell the story in a way that I can connect to. So yeah, Undying the Undying is the peak of Undertale's Genocide run, and I'm not going to apologize for that, all you Sans lovers out there. You're going to really hate me by the end of this, because everything after Undying is boring and tedious, and the rest of the edgy 2010s creepypasta content I've become so accustomed to in this run. Hotland is all the same, except no Alphys, and Mettaton is curt about getting the show on the road. Unlike Papyrus, I don't think Mettaton skipping the pleasantries is offensive to the character, and instead, I'm actually relieved that we're just getting on with things, especially considering that you need to kill 40 monsters in this zone. This is the zone I was referring to in the gameplay section, where I said it could take up to 2 hours if you're unlucky. For this to be in the last area of the game just solidifies my belief in the existence of the implication, because the only reason I would care to do this mind-numbingly boring task would be if I already made up my mind that I was just gonna do the Genocide run, for no other reason. It isn't fun, it isn't interesting, it doesn't add anything to the story, it's just annoying to do. Finally get to Mettaton, whatever, and it's another one-hit kill boss. Really underwhelming, intentionally so, because it's technically a fake out for the actual real final boss. The musical does a better job of telling a story with Mettaton in the Genocide run, but I'm done talking about the musical for now. So, we get to the penultimate area, where normally, in a normal run, monsters would tell us the story of the first fallen child and what happened to them. In this case, Flowey tells us the other side of the story. For the sake of cohesion, I'll tell both sides to you now, but understand that you wouldn't get the full story unless you played both of them. Sometime after the humans locked the monsters away, a human child fell down into the underground, where Azrael, the king's son, found them and brought them home, where Toriel and Asgore, the queen and king, took the child in as their own and loved them like their own child. And all the monsters of the underground were hopeful that through this human, the war and hatred for humans would come to an end. Azrael and the human child were the best of friends and continued to play, but the fallen child was strange and would get violent and often have very intense outbursts at Azrael, who was typically very mild-mannered and meek. The fallen child convinced Azrael that he could get up to see the sun if the fallen child ingested some poisonous flowers, and Azrael would absorb his soul to cross the barrier. Though, as far as the king and queen were concerned, they only witnessed the fallen child fall ill, and the child insisted with his dying breaths that Azrael take his body up to the surface and bury him amongst his favorite flowers from the village he came from. Upon doing so, the humans attacked Azrael, who refused to fight back, instead placing the human's body into a flower bed and returning home. Upon entering the underground, he died. The king, outraged, demanded that any human that fall down or enter the underground be killed and have their soul harvested to break the barrier. His wife, distressed and distraught at hearing this, ran away, never to be seen again. All the monsters now await in hope as the seventh human child enters the underground. In desperation, the king took what was left of Azrael and tried his best to have his soul revived by an injection of determination, but the best that they could do was supplant the remains of his soul into a flower and fill that flower with determination, thus creating Flowey. Flowey spent the first few days crying, as he was confused and scared, but as he spent time with Asgore, he slowly began to realize that he didn't feel anything at all. No matter how hard he tried, he lacked the soul to feel emotion, and with that realization came frustration and anger. He ran away to find his mother, Toriel, reasoning that if anybody could make him feel anything, it was his mother. But even after spending time with her, he realized she didn't make him feel anything either. He was distressed, distraught, confused, and so he decided there was no reason to live at all. Intent on taking his own life, he resolved that there would be nothing after death, especially for someone like him, someone who has no soul. But when he tried to, he found that he suddenly had the human's ability to control the flow of time at his own will. From then on, he began to live out every reality he could possibly imagine, with the hopes of finding meaning in even one of them. At first, he helped everyone, doing what he could to make as many people happy as he could, dedicating every action to the betterment of those around him. But, after a while, it wasn't fulfilling anymore. Next, he resolved to kill everyone he encountered, but killing everyone was repulsive to him at first, and he convinced himself that he was only doing it because he was curious to know what would happen if he did. He had done everything, seen every possible outcome, and was entirely bored of all of it. The only thing that he couldn't predict was any human that came by, and least of all, you. But what he doesn't understand is how you, the fallen child, from all of those days in his childhood, had suddenly returned. Hadn't Toriel buried you in the garden? Or maybe that's why you were found in the ruins. But even then, hadn't you heard all the times that Flowey had cried out for you? Why are you only responding now? Regardless, Flowey is tired of everything. Tired of all the monsters, tired of this game that he keeps playing with himself, tired of the countless realities that he's witnessed. He wants it all to be over, and he thinks of you as the omen that this is going to happen. He waits for you to prove the thing that you taught him, that in this world it's kill or be killed. This Flowey conversation all but confirms my suspicions about Toby Fox's intended design philosophy. That being, in order to do the Genocide run, we should already have known what happens in the Pacifist run. I think the design philosophy is horribly flawed, something, the implication. And he even admits to this philosophy by having Flowey say the thing about, I didn't want to do it, but I had to know, as if that's some kind of justifiable reason. Curiosity is not a justifiable reason to do the Genocide run. And even if it were, nobody's curiosity is so strong that it transcends their decency and common sense to change paths at the dozens of times throughout the game that it insists you should. If anything, Flowey loses what little goodwill I had for him in his ability to tell a compelling story, because all he proves here is that he doesn't believe his own teachings. Flowey is a nihilist, the cringiest, edgiest, most juvenile kind of villain to write, because his motivation is founded on the most cursory, surface-level observations on the world that any Tumblrina who has ever had a bad day could grasp. Nothing matters, so I should just kill things to see what happens. Whoa, that's so quirky and weird. What a pitiful and lame motivation for this main voice of the antagonist to take. And I'm sure that this isn't some underlying message about the dangers of nihilism or something, because it's never addressed. It's not like Flowey's nihilism is addressed in any of the runs, and pointed out as being problematic. He's just a nihilist who, like all nihilists, crumbles as soon as their own life is threatened by us in that exact conversation. And another thing on how lame a villain Flowey is in the Genocide run, he claims to not feel anything, and yet he is capable of feeling fear and sadness. In his own story, he says he feels fear and sadness. So either a soul isn't a prerequisite for having emotions, or, and this is what I believe is actually true in the situation, he does have a soul, and he's just using the excuse of not having a soul to justify the horrible nihilistic things he's doing. And don't give me that, but Kiwi, he's just a kid. He couldn't be expected to know how to deal with depression, because that implies a kid, given immortality and depression, would rationally choose to be a psychopath loser nihilist and not literally anything else. The thing is, I, the player, would know that Flowey is Azrael if I played the pacifist run. So if I should have played the pacifist run first to get the full story, the implication, so why even have him give me this sob story? All it does is deflate the little bit of goodwill I had for this character that was compelling in the Genocide run. The Genocide route was the chance for Flowey's first interaction to redeem itself. Let's do a rewrite of Flowey real quick. After Flowey becomes a flower, he finds out that his body begins to deteriorate unless he absorbs monster souls every so often. Instead of needing food or whatever else, he has to have a monster soul consumed by him. How else would he get monster souls except by killing people? What's worse is the remnants of the fallen child that was in him, that violence and strangeness, still pulsate somewhere inside of him and makes him compelled to kill things. But the rest of him, that is the Azrael part of him that remains, is terrified of this and doesn't want to be around people that he loves because he's afraid that he would lash out and kill them. That's why he runs away from Asgore. He's afraid that he might kill Asgore, and he runs away to the ruins, considering that's probably the place where there's the fewest amount of things and the most dead monsters. If he can find any monsters clinging to life, they'd probably be at the ruins, and maybe he can sustain himself there. But it's there that he finds Toriel, where he gets even more distressed, because not only is this another person he cares about, but this is the place where he died. This is the flower bed that he was laid and buried. This trauma is enough to just completely send him into a spiral where he doesn't want to live anymore. He intentionally starves himself, waiting at the flower bed for something to happen until eventually his body falls apart. But when his monster soul fails, the remnants of the human soul that merged with his in the last moments that he absorbed it sparks and sends him back into where he was at the moment that his determination was the highest. Flowey now realizes the horrible hell that he's found himself in, that this bad part of him, this human determination, is the thing that's keeping him alive. It won't let him die. He has to kill things. It is literally kill or be killed. So he goes around. He tries his best to help anybody that he can, because the alternative is he's just gonna go on a murderous rampage because he physically cannot stop himself from doing so. But no matter which he chooses to do, he wakes up all the same after he either starves himself or chooses to die alone. He wakes up all the same and has to do everything all over again. The same conversations, the same places, the same things, the same actions. He reads every book, he burns every book, he does everything that he possibly can, and nothing satiates him. The only solace he can find in the entire situation is that whenever he gives in to these determined impulses, he has some control over when and how they fire, meaning he can choose specific moments to load back into. Meaning he could do some good and then give into the impulses and then save, so that at least that little bit of good that he did before was saved before he goes and kills. Unfortunately, the more that he gives into them, the harder it is to come back to being himself. Until finally, he can't even separate in his own mind where the impulses stop and where he begins. All leading to the events of Undertale, where, out of nowhere, the fallen child returns. The spitting image of the same exact child that haunts Flowey's every waking moments appears right in front of Flowey. And all that Flowey can think is how much he hates this person, this human, this monster that has torn apart his soul and rearranged him and forced him to do all of these atrocities. All that he can think to do is give it a taste of its own medicine. He tries to kill it, and in his cruelty and hatred, he yells out the thing that has been repeating in his head forever, for all of this eternity. In this world, it's kill or be killed. But he can't stop it. He's never been able to stop it. And the only difference now is that this impulse is no longer for him to control. He finds out that it isn't his ability to control time anymore. It's the fallen child's. And the more that the fallen child gives in to this impulse, the less that the impulse affects Flowey. So suddenly, Flowey has two things going for him. One, he has a source of food at all times because the impulse has left his quote-unquote body and is now roaming around killing everything instead of him. And with each kill that the fallen child makes, Flowey becomes himself a little bit more each time. So of course Flowey is going to encourage that this impulse manifested continues to do what it's doing. Of course he's going to support this because that's the only way that he could be free. And as we get to, in the rewrite, where we are right now in the story, he's kind of come to terms with loving this fallen child again, the way that he did as Asriel. He says, "Thank you for freeing me from this horrible thing that's happened." But what he doesn't realize is the impulse still wants him dead. And as he realizes that, he's terrified and runs away, hiding, and we'll get to what happens later, but it doesn't end well for him. Do you see how rewriting Flowey to need to kill things changes how the entire dynamic of the Genocide run works? Instead of this moment where Flowey is like a smug soy jack and goes like, "Yeah, you're just like me, you kill stuff because you're bored," suddenly it's like a body horror thing where Flowey has to kill things. He needs to kill things. He craves blood, but he does not want to. And meanwhile, us, the player, since we're going by the rules of the implication where we're not even concerned about what the fallen child is actually thinking, we, the player, embrace the exact opposite mindset. We don't need to kill these monsters. We could beat the entire game not killing a single thing. But we're doing it because we want funny number to go up. We want the blood. We want to absorb souls to become stronger. And by admitting that, we completely circumvent the implication. It's no longer about the fallen child. The fallen child might as well not exist. Flowey speaking directly to us beyond the screen, not even looking at the fallen child, or rather looking through the fallen child at us. That's what needed to happen. Instead, Flowey is talking to the fallen child, and then we're like in the fallen child's head going, "This doesn't apply to me. What are you talking about?" The challenge of making a Genocide run in a game where I can choose the extreme good or the extreme evil is justifying why I would choose extreme evil. Because there are tons of reasons to choose extreme good, least of all are roleplay reasons. For how much I've been harping on how important roleplay is, the reason that I actually want to do a true pacifist run isn't because I want to roleplay Frisk as a noble person who wants to save all of monster kind. It's because I want Flowey to be happy. I want to solve Flowey's problem. Flowey is the main face of all of the problems in the Underground, and I want to solve them. I want Flowey to turn back into Asriel and be happy. So imagine in those last moments where you weren't even thinking about Flowey in a Genocide run. The implication had such a tight grip on you, you weren't even thinking about what you were doing. You were just going and killing stuff because you're not supposed to care. But in those last moments, suddenly realizing that in doing this horrible thing, you're actually accidentally doing something good. But it's too late, because by the time that you've finished and you've reached 20 LV, you'll have no choice but to kill Flowey. Because the same impulses that were taking hold of Flowey have finally taken root into you. And the first thing that they'll have you do is kill Flowey. But no, Flowey is a joke of a character in the Genocide run because his motivations are that of an edgy 2010s internet user in the postmodern, post-irony era of the internet where people casually made jokes about their depression and killing themselves. Back in the day, I knew tons of people in high school who ran in that crowd who were awed by how real and deep the Genocide run actually was because it was all a metaphor for depression or whatever. But no, it sucks, it's lazy, and it's bad writing. Speaking of lazy, it's time to talk about Sans Undertale. I'm just gonna get this out of the way right now. Sans in the Genocide run is overrated. His character, his fight, his music, his meta humor, his attempts at being profound and secretly a really intelligent guy, all of it, overrated, overhyped. Not as good as Undyne, not as good as Mettaton, not as good as Papyrus. Sans Undertale is not as good as everyone gives him credit for. It's not to say he's bad, necessarily. Clearly, this was the character that Toby Fox put the most care and passion into making. He set Sans up from the beginning to be this impossible secret boss who you weren't supposed to see coming because in the Pacifist run, he doesn't do anything and he keeps making ominous threats he doesn't put out. Well, here you go. Here's his chance to put out.
Whoa, that's crazy. He can dodge, just like you. Whoa, he has only one attack and one defense, and his check thing says he only does 1 damage. Whoa, he can attack even though it's your turn.
All of these are gimmicks at best, and it's at least respectful that these gimmicks only appear at Sans' fight, but it's all just way too much and way too on the nose. In a normal run, Sans uses this time to break the meta by explaining that here in the underground, there are these arbitrary stats that all monsters have called Level of Violence, LV, which represents your ability to cause pain in others, and Execution Points, EXP, which represents how much pain you have caused in others. It's a tongue-in-cheek way to explain these RPG terms as they exist in the game, and in a pacifist run is a welcome little jab. In the Genocide run, he doesn't tell you any of this. The implication, I know, but it would have been nice to know why I was one-shotting all of those bosses before. If my LV is high enough, my threshold to cause pain to others is very, very high. The more that I want to cause pain to them, the more pain I will cause, and therefore explains why the fallen child, not me, has the ability to kill a huge boss monster in one hit. This revelation is never spelled out for us, and has to be inferred, but the implication. For me to know how EXP and LV work would have required me to know that they were a bad thing. So the shock of finding out is wasted on a run that I would never have accumulated any EXP or LV. Instead, the conversation that Sans has with you is a fake out. He is about to say the thing that he wants to say in the pacifist route, and then he goes, never mind, you want to have a bad time, because if you take one more step forward, you're really not going to like what happens next. Oh, sorry, Toriel, I'm gonna kill this kid. Megalovania as a song is overrated. I think it's too busy to be really meaningful and too contextually messy to analyze at the level of battle against a true hero. What I mean by contextually messy is, Sans will not stop yapping during the actual fight. I know, rich coming from me, the king of yapping, but I'm serious. The whole fight, Sans is going on and on about some cryptic ARG type shit about how I can't go back home. We've been seeing time anomalies. That's your fault, isn't it? That stuff that he's saying isn't even really interesting in its own right. Nothing he's saying has any impact on the story as we know or on the implication. All that it does is raise more questions that we can just assume we'll never get the answers to because no matter what, we have to kill Sans to progress. He has some funny moments or whatever where he makes a joke, but that's all it is, a long joke that people hype up to be some crazy, groundbreaking, amazing secret boss.
Oh, what if he's Ness? What if he's Gaster? Whoa, Gaster! Did you know the laser attack that he has called Gaster Blaster? Whoa, Gaster! Like the font, and he's Sans and Papyrus. Whoa!
Alright, intermission. I realized looking back at the script that I don't actually explain what my, problem is with the Sans fight. I just go on this rant about how I think he's overrated. So let me try to explain. Sans reeks of Toby Fox trying to be Cave Story. If you don't know, Cave Story is kind of like the father of all pixel indie games. It was released in 2004. It's a open source software. You can download it probably right now. And one of the things that Cave Story is known for is its kind of wacky story. There's a lot of things that aren't entirely explained in its story. Things that you kind of see and let your imagination fill in the gaps for. Or if they are explained, they're explained in a way that feels very mythical. And nowhere else is this quirky storytelling apparent than in the best ending of the game, the secret ending, where you go into the bowels of the island and fight Balos, the guy who's like in charge of everything that's been happening. As you make your way to Balos, you get bits and pieces of who he is and what his connection is to everything that's going on, but none of it is outright explained to you. None of it is really laid out for you in a way that anyone could just be like, oh yeah, obviously this is what it is. All culminating to this moment when you finally get to him after fighting through literal hell to get to him. There's this moment of like awe that, whoa, I'm meeting this guy that no one knows anything about, and it's this like ultimate final battle to the death. This person that just showed up, this villain, this bad guy who's in control of everything secretly, who's behind everything, and now I get this moment to fight him, and even after you kill him, you're still left with questions. You're left with what was all that about? But that's what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be a mystery. It was your reward for being curious and looking around and finding out these things, finding these bits and pieces of lore about this mysterious person that you're up against. Sans feels like someone looked at the blueprint of this idea that a secret boss has to be very mysterious. Looked at that blueprint and went, okay, so I get it, I see. The way that you execute this is you make a guy who you don't expect to be the bad guy. Sans being a secret boss doesn't feel earned from any perspective, whether you look at it from the implication or from the actual narrative. It just doesn't feel like he's supposed to be the final boss. And all that cryptic stuff that he's saying in the meantime just feels desperate. It feels so desperate to be like, oh, but look, it's justified. Look, he's saying all this stuff that you didn't know. He's introducing a mystery to you. Isn't that worth going through all of this to do the Genocide run? And then there's Megalovania, a song that Toby Fox has used for his other projects in the past for secret bosses. It just doesn't feel like it was made for Sans. It doesn't feel like it was made to fit this scenario. It just feels like a cool song that you put on a cool secret boss. Nothing about this situation feels tailored to Undertale. It's just someone looked at what worked for indie pixel games, for what works for indie pixel games secret bosses, and said, do all of that. Make a mysterious, unassuming guy who you wouldn't expect. Suddenly you have to fight him, you have to go through hell to get to him, and he has this cool music, and that's it. And then he has like, he dies. I would even be happy if they switched Undyne and Sans. I would be fine with Sans if Sans happened immediately after you killed Papyrus, and then as you're going through Waterfall, Sans stops you and goes like, hey, I don't like that you killed Papyrus, I'm gonna fight you now. I'd be happy with it. I'd be like, oh cool, that's a cool way for Sans to be introduced, and then the final battle being against Undyne is a perfect way to end the story, because it ends with that emotional moment of, I am morally superior to you, I am the last bastion of all that is good, and you've killed me, so it's over. Instead, when you swap them, it ends on a really confusing note of, well, that kind of happened. That was like a weird, difficult boss fight that had nothing to do with the game that I'm playing. Because, by the implication, I am always made consciously aware that I am playing a video game. Whatever, I'm done talking about him. We kill Sans, good. And finally, we're here, the end of our journey. We get to Asgore, who, like in the Pacifist and Neutral ending, is unexpectedly unassuming, but the implication takes no prisoners. We fight Asgore, and then, uh-oh, Flowey kills him, big surprise, and then, oh, suddenly Flowey cares and cries and gets Azrael's face. Should have thought about that before. Being a loser. Die. In the rewrite that I would have had, killing Flowey would have meant something, because there was a reason that we, the player, would not have wanted to kill him, and yet our actions have already caused him to be fated to death by the actions of the character. But, you know, since this is the Genocide run as it's written, the implication takes no prisoners, Flowey dies, who cares? This exact thing is what I've meant every time that I've said the implication. What is the point of even having Flowey do this if at this point we shouldn't even care about it? Why even bother doing that? When it could have just been, kill Asgore, the end. You know? It could have just been, oh, congratulations, you killed everything, the end.
Why bother having Flowey cry other than to make him more pathetic? I don't care that he's doing this. I have no sympathy for him. This could have been an opportunity to make me suddenly feel something, but they didn't. And now we get the true ending of the Genocide run. As I'm sure you might have surmised by now, turns out the child we were playing as was not actually the fallen child, and instead, the child we named at the start was Asriel's friend, the one from the story who poisoned themselves. It was their determination that we were using, and our residual determination was keeping their soul alive. And it's a creepypasta, so their eyes are bleeding, and they're really evil, and they look right at the camera, and they refer to us, the player behind the screen, and though everyone's bad and should die. And at this point, you know, this is why I must have come here, so I better just go with it, and it's a jump scare, Look, 2010's creepypasta died pretty much the moment it was born, and to its credit, Undertale did this in the medium of video games, to my knowledge, before any others. Definitely before Doki Doki Literature Club and the 100 other games after it that also did the exact same thing. For whatever reason, I can tolerate those games and their use of creepypasta much more than I can tolerate Undertale's. It's just such a jarring and anticlimactic way to end this story. And if that was the intended story the whole time, the intended story of all of Undertale, that the whole time the character that we're playing is actually, you know, being puppeted by this edgy, creepypasta child who bleeds out of their eyes and does a jump scare. Why? Why put all of your chips on making it a shitty creepypasta? Why make that the true villain of this story? Finally, to a point that I wanted to make a long time ago when I was talking about the Genocide run requiring quote-unquote determination. What the hell is determination? Like, how is it defined in the scope of the Genocide run? What's the difference between determination, the red soul, and perseverance, the purple soul? Why is it called determination to want to kill everyone? What, just because I want to continue to kill stuff, I'm determined? How can determination be both positive and negative? I guess because I could be determined to be good or determined to be bad, but then why don't monsters have that? You're telling me Papyrus wasn't determined? Or Sans? Is evil determination somehow stronger than good, and that's why the fallen child can continue to live? It's all just so confused, it's so undefined. Intentionally so, perhaps, but it doesn't really help the case of the story. For example, if in this last moment, the fallen child decided to explain to us what determination was as the ability to pursue a desired end, then I guess it would make sense that monsters don't get determination because it's not something they would need to have. Monsters live forever, or at least a very long time, so they wouldn't have the same need as humans do to have an end in their lifetime. Their lifetimes are infinite, which is why humans who have very short temporal lives would need to have determination. Papyrus has a goal that he wants, but it isn't necessarily an end. He doesn't know what the end of being a royal guard actually looks like, and therefore, his dedication to being a royal guard can't be called determination. Undyne didn't have determination. She had a goal to kill the human, but it wasn't until her artificial determination kicked in that suddenly she now envisioned the end, killing the humans and ending everything. Coincidentally, that envisioning of the end also required her life to be cut very short. What should have been a very serious and remorseful and eye-opening ending to one of the three endings of this game ends up feeling really goofy and silly because it ends with a creepypasta. In fact, pursuing the Genocide run kind of ruins the other two endings, because if after you've done a Genocide run and reset the world, and then do a pacifist run, it goes, oh, by the way, the fallen child was still inside of Frisk and kills everybody after, so it doesn't even matter. And you might argue that that is when the events of the Genocide run are actually brought into me caring, but no, that's stupid. If anything, I should be applying the implication to everything at that point. If it doesn't matter, if the fallen child is in me whether I do a Genocide run or not, then who cares? I shouldn't care about anything that goes on in any of the runs, which is certainly not the story that Toby Fox wanted to tell. That inclusion is very obviously Toby Fox going, oh yeah, do you regret doing the Genocide run? And you know what, Toby? Yeah, I do regret doing the Genocide run. Not because I'm a terrible person or because I don't like how it has affected the characters in this game, because it was boring and a waste of time. Of course, I didn't think any of this at the time. When I first played Undertale all those years ago to impress that girl in my science class who then told me she wasn't into guys and then went on to date a different girl who I had tried to woo but was also lesbian, I thought, oh wow, that was kinda cool, and moved on. And that was pretty much where I left the Genocide run, because it wasn't of interest to me. I replayed the game a few more times, but mostly just engaged with Undertale via the community and eventually Deltarune, which I should mention, though I'm not going to go into any depth about it here, the Genocide run of that game fixes some of those issues. And that was until Undertale Yellow came out.
Before we get too far into Undertale Yellow, it's only fair that I address the elephant in the room that makes it very difficult to judge a classic like Undertale against this fairly. Undertale Yellow is a fan game based on Undertale, meaning it's highly unlikely that someone would just stumble upon Yellow without first having played, enjoyed, and understood the nuances of Undertale to some extent. Meaning that the heavy lifting of defining what is an Undertale game has already been done, which automatically allows Yellow to innovate freely in some directions because there was not the risk that people might not like this and not be interested.
My only counter to this argument is that Yellow runs the risk of being swamped in with all the myriad of other Undertale fan content, varying in quality from garbage to decent. So, if Yellow didn't try to be good and unique, it wouldn't have succeeded at all in standing out from the crowd. In that respect, I think Yellow had more to prove than Undertale did, and therefore, its changes and innovations are valid in their own right. With all that being said, let's get into the story of Undertale Yellow's Genocide run. The story begins in a very similar vein to Undertale, but with a few key differences that make a massive difference to things moving forward. But it's the same principle. Long ago there was a war, but the humans won, locked the monsters away underneath a mountain, the entire underground. The difference is in three key pieces of knowledge that we, and presumably the main character, knows. 1. Their king was peaceful, but eventually declared that any humans that come down there would die. 2. There have already been a few humans to venture to the mountain, but they never returned. And 3. This child did not fall, but instead willingly traveled down into the mountain with intent on finding those missing children. Unlike Undertale, that child has a name. That child's name is Clover. So already we're off to a fantastic start, and for a few reasons. Starting with, we are no longer the character anymore. Finally, there's role-playing in my 2D postmodern role-playing game, and the character that we're role-playing has a motivation, has background knowledge, and has established themselves to be strong-willed. I hesitate to use, the D word, because it's very specific, apparently, but if I could use it to describe them, I would. Clover, knowing that Asgore used to be peaceful, but then mysteriously turned to be cruel to humans for reasons he wouldn't know, but we, the player, do, means that there is a plausible reason for Clover to either choose pacifism or genocide. All this cowboy hat wearing kid knows about monsters is that there was a war and that the king of monsters wants all humans dead. So we can view this in a few ways. The first way we can look at this is that he doesn't think the stories are even true, but brings a gun with him anyway to scare off coyotes or whatever else he might reasonably think is down there. Second, we might assume that he does think there are monsters and intends to bring the gun for self-defense or to shoot his way through to find the kids. Lastly, we might assume that he doesn't believe any of this and just wants to pretend to be a cowboy in the mountains, so he brings his toy gun and shoots rocks or whatever. Whichever way you want to roleplay your Clover, there is plenty of room to extrapolate and justify what would start him on this journey in the first place. Our journey begins at the same flower bed as in Undertale, though instead of being on their back, like in Undertale, Clover came down here on purpose, did not fall, but instead jumped down here. The only thing with him is toy gun, his worn hat, and the poster of the missing children, which, when he looks at, reminds him of the justice that needs to be dispensed in this place. In the first room over, we encounter a frogget. First proof to Clover that monsters do in fact exist, and Clover decides to attack it, to scare it off, or to see if it's even real, or just because he was startled by it. Regardless, he doesn't get a chance to kill it because a bigger monster comes and scares it off. This monster introduces herself as Toriel, and doesn't seem to want to hurt Clover, also implying that she has in fact seen the other children fall down here. Clover, despite what we, the player, eventually want to do,
doesn't have any innate bloodlust, and is probably a well-mannered Western gentleman, so he obliges her as she intends to bring him to her home, where he will eventually ask her some questions about the others, or just hopefully find them there.
By the way, I can already foresee the seething, coping, and molding of Undertale Genocide lovers in the comments, saying things like, wow, you're really biased because you're actually going into the nuances of the storytelling in this one. Undertale has nuanced storytelling in its Genocide run, how come you didn't give it this treatment? The difference is that Clover is an actual character with background and motivation. That way, he actually has the ability to exchange information with me as the player, as I was discussing earlier. When we get tutorial as Clover, we have tons of things that we can imagine Clover might be thinking. But regardless of what we, the player, want Clover to do, Clover decides to follow Toriel. And there are loads of moments later where Clover does things without us wanting him to. By the time we see Toriel in Undertale, we've already made up our minds as the player to do the Genocide run. And because, you know, the implication, what Frisk wants or what the Fallen Child wants doesn't matter, because it's not gonna matter later down the line. Even if we decide to play through all of Undertale Yellow's Genocide run with the same mentality as in Undertale's Genocide run, that being, I'm just playing a game, I just want to see number go up, I don't care about any of these characters. Clover still cares about these characters, and so even as we're puppeting Clover around, how Clover reacts to this thing that he might not want to do suddenly becomes important because he has a will and character of his own. And with this will and character comes the ability to actually put impact on these decisions that we, the player, are making. And how are those impacts explored? By the plot and by the narrative and by how we can infer Clover is feeling about the situation. So if you want me to give the same treatment to Undertale's Genocide run, you better have a compelling argument for why the implication doesn't exist. Anyway, Clover follows her instructions and solves her puzzle until disaster strikes and he's separated from her, dropped into darkness where she calls out to wait for her to help him out. He reasons, however, that it might just be faster to find a way up on his own. After all, if there's a basement, there must be stairs to it somewhere, so he travels deeper into the ruins, wondering what he might find.
A dusty and ominous hallway awaits him, and at the end, a flower with a face speaks to him. The underground surely is a strange, almost whimsical place unlike anything that Clover would have ever known above. The flower introduces himself as Flowey. Flowey the Flower, who, recognizing you have likely split off from Toriel, offers to teach you how things work down here. It should be noted that in contrast to how Undertale presents Flowey as immediately ominous, cruel, and by betraying you, Yellow presents him as wholly whimsical. Maybe not necessarily truthful or good, per se, but whimsical, like the Cheshire Cat showing up to Alice. It's the first taste of how actually strange the underground is to a human. And he gives good enough advice to the player that you should dodge the attacks and that should anything happen to you, he'll act as the save file and fix it. It's also a nice touch that Clover's soul is yellow, meaning his soul's abundant trait is justice. Keep this in mind for later as it becomes very important. Clover likely doesn't understand even half of what Flowey has to say, but understands well enough that the monsters want to attack him, and thanks to his run-in with the frog thing from earlier, he knows that he has the tools for the job to stop them. I like to think that in this first section, Clover still thinks of this as a game. Like, he has some childlike distinction in his head that makes him believe monsters are still kind of fake, imaginary. Like, imaginary bad guys that he shoots at with his guns. It's not like he has real bullets or anything, so it must be a game. And what's more, even if they were real, they probably did something bad. Even just attacking a child for no particular reason is bad enough that they should be put to justice. Whatever the reason, Clover resolves that there's no reason to avoid fighting monsters he encounters as he goes along, and perhaps even that he intended to fight every monster from the start. Now that he has his ally, Flowey, it's just another justification that a monster could choose to cooperate with a human if they wanted to, so those who don't are willingly choosing to be evil.
It does, admittedly, become hard to justify Clover hunting down and killing every monster, but we can just assume that it's just a matter of Clover being lost and stumbling upon monsters that are coming to attack him. Look, if we have to assume that the fallen child of Undertale is willingly running around in circles to find every monster and that's supposed to be hunting them down, then we can flavor text Clover's wandering around every room as just him being lost. Eventually, Clover makes it through, all under the commentary of Flowey, who seems to support him regardless of the choice he might make here. It's also in the ruins we meet this mysterious hooded creature who we will eventually know as Dalv. For now, he just says cryptic things to Clover as if he were someone else, but Regardless, Flowey lets Clover know that this monster stands in the way of getting out of here, and so eventually he might have to kill him. As our genocide continues, I really appreciate the enemies are retreating song that begins to play when you've made progress. It's not only a good audio cue for the player that they are on the right track, but also good narratively to signify that the monsters are realizing what Clover is doing and are reacting differently to it. It's little changes like this that break up the monotony of a genocide run, and it's really appreciated. After we've successfully wiped out the ruins, Flowey comes and congratulates Clover, saying that with this power he'll be out of here in no time. But something has changed about Clover. Maybe he's starting to realize that these monsters are more than just imaginary creatures or mindless animals. After all, they've talked to him, they've tried to play with him, they've begged him for mercy, and he didn't listen. Perhaps in this moment he becomes suspicious of Flowey. Why would he recommend he kill all these monsters if he himself was also a monster? A shadow falls across his face as he tips his hat down, unable to look at what he's done. Flowey misinterprets this look on Clover's face and smugly remarks that Clover shouldn't even think about killing him, a thought which hadn't, until Flowey had said it, crossed Clover's mind, and that Flowey was the only thing keeping him alive. Once again, it's these little moments of characterization that go such a long way, especially in a story like this. All that happened was there was a sprite change. Clover's sprite goes from you can see his eyes to now there's a shadow over his eyes. But why might that be? There is an actual physical reaction to the genocide run happening from Clover. I didn't choose for Clover to put the thing over his eyes. All that I, the player, chose to do was do a genocide run. But Clover covered his face, covered his eyes, and you can't see them anymore. The reason as to why is unique to however you're deciding to roleplay Clover. The Clover that I present in this narrative might not be at all the Clover that you decide to roleplay if you do a genocide run. But I'm presenting this to show you that there is a way that you can present Clover as being roleplayed that makes the genocide run feel more impactful. I also find it very interesting that Flowey doesn't know Clover's actual reason for being here. Flowey assumes that Clover's reason is selfish because he himself couldn't fathom the concept of sacrificing anything to help someone else, especially when there isn't anything that could be done to help them. Flowey has made it clear to Clover that at this point, the humans are dead, but at best their souls can be laid to rest if Clover finds them at the castle. Even at this point, Flowey assumes Clover is just killing monsters to get out faster and for no other reason. Flowey doesn't even say the word justice once, but that is solely Clover's reason for being down here, as far as we, the players, know. Clover continues onward in silence, stopping only to recognize a morbid realization that there is nobody and nothing here but him and the hooded creature. He finally catches up to him and, "I don't understand. You look just like them," says the creature. "Is this some sort of haunting? Or have you come to finish the job? Recruiting here wasn't enough. You came here to finish the job. Is that right?" Clover stares in silence, the shadow only deepening on his face. This monster was talking about one of the other children. They must have met before, and if they met, that means this monster must have done something to that human. "Whatever I did to you that day was not my intention. I was only... Never mind. Words aren't enough. I don't want to fight anybody, but you've invaded my home. The exit is blocked, and you can't stay here. I won't allow it. Only one thing to do." The monster removes its hood, its eyes not meeting Clover's cold and steely gaze as they begin combat. Dalv's fight is a great one to start a genocide run with because it actually succeeds in making you question the righteousness of this course without patronizing you for it. Dalv is clearly remorseful about whatever evil he commit, but it's also clear that he did commit evil. Instead of the motivations for killing him being, "I just want to see what happens, lol," it's complex. Is it justice to kill someone who regrets the horrible crime they commit? You could argue that, and it's in that could that Clover's motivation and character arc lie. It's that could that allows it to be the same Clover who spares everyone or kills everyone. The could is where our input as the player is introduced. Not in some heavy-handed, obvious way like Undertale does, but in a very natural and personal way which blends seamlessly with what the character we are role-playing knows and can react to. Once again, that idea of exchanging information between the player and the character. The whole fight, Dalv expresses his grief and desire to be rid of the horrible memory he has of what he did to the other child. But it does nothing to assuage Clover, who holds in his heart that if Dalv truly didn't want to hurt anyone, as he claims so earnestly, then he wouldn't have in the first place. Finally, Dalv resolves that maybe Clover isn't even real, and that if he wakes up, it will all be over.
But with each precisely aimed bullet from Clover's gun, Delve realizes the truth, that this is his end, and justice is finally being served for what he had done. As he fades to dust, Clover stares on, no longer the plucky child that came down here, but now a child full of confusion and fear. This was not some fun adventure he might make some new friends on. It was a mission to judge these monsters. It's honestly very realistic that after this, Clover might decide not to continue a genocide run. He might decide that he should only kill the monsters who definitely had something to do with one of the children dying here, or might just decide to give up on the adventure entirely. Perhaps this encounter made him paranoid that every monster, regardless of how meek they might appear, has the capacity to kill him against their will, and so any monster that approaches him should be killed out of self-defense. For the sake of this narrative, we're saying that he chooses to continue to kill stuff, but I digress. I hope now you can see that I'm telling Yellow's story like this not out of bias, but because this is how the story actually presents itself. There's no moment of how would the character feel after killing Toriel, because we're basically told from the start not to care about how our character feels. And indeed, if we were concerned with how our character felt, then we would never have been in a position to kill Toriel in one hit in the first place. In this story, we have a motivation. We have little moments beyond our control of characterization that could influence how we, the player, suddenly feel about the situation and about how our character might feel about the situation. I could end the video here and my point would be made, but I won't because we haven't gotten to the best part of the run yet. Clover presses onward, entering Delve's hovel of a home. He's unimpressed with what he sees. A funny helium balloon and some inedible food are all that he finds. He wanders through, out of curiosity, and finds the creature's room and a diary which only confirms the depravity of this creature's mental state. Clover doesn't bother to read further and makes for the exit. He'd forgotten about Toriel. He'd forgotten about everything other than what he had come here to do, to dispense justice. Flowey, chipper as ever, helps Clover leave, expressing his gratitude that they are working together and insists that anything Clover can't do on his own is his responsibility to manage. Clover continues, unsure what to think about Flowey at this moment, and exits into the rest of the underground. Clover then finds himself in the middle of a snowy forest. Not quite at all what he expected would be something he encounters down here in the underground, but continues nonetheless. Flowey also assures Clover that since no one ever really goes into the ruins, no one would know that Clover had killed everybody up to this point. So, at this point, Clover could choose to change his actions now. Though, whatever Clover decides to do, Flowey will support him through it. Clover, in this story, has no intention of changing his course and looks onward. It should be noted that in this game, there are NPCs that exist during the Genocide run. This is also a pretty big narrative difference because, again, it establishes that Clover does not have innate bloodlust. It's not like he would or even wants to kill everything, just, for some reason, the things that approach him. All the while, the shadow remains on his face. He's unable to look in the eye anyone or anything, but silently and grimly blast them away, remembering with each shot the words Delve said, "Whatever I did that day was not my intention." How many of these monsters would do the same to him given the chance? He wouldn't let that happen. On his travels, he eavesdrops on a bird monster, recalibrating some sort of puzzle. She seems chipper enough and doesn't catch sight of Clover, who waits with his hand already at his hip to fire if she dares lock eyes with him. But she leaves, and Clover continues onward, continuing to kill as he goes. As he trudges through Snowdon, he encounters Mo, a charismatic raccoon-like salesman who either doesn't know or is willingly overlooking the killing Clover has been doing. He offers to sell healing items to Clover, who, after having sustained some damage from all these monsters, realizes it's probably for the best to accept help however he can get it. I really like Mo, but we'll get into why as he appears later. In the wake of Clover's obliteration, he leaves the forest colder, quieter, and more empty than it was before. He gets to what would have been a cozy resort, only to find it abandoned. Mostly empty. He approaches the counter. Surely it can't hurt to take a few of these pastries for the road. If nobody's here to run the place, then they must be free. He reaches across the counter and grabs what he can, including some of the money left out. Yes, stealing does return here, and it suffers largely the same problems Undertale stealing does, but at least, because there's characterization of Clover, it's actually role-playable, which is all it really needs to be. As he gets to the end of the forest, he re-encounters the bird that he saw before. Martlet.
Oh boy, do I love Martlet in the Genocide run. In the normal game, she's fine, whatever, but I think her presentation and character is flawless, specifically in the Genocide run.
Martlet sees Clover and shows genuine concern and compassion that a child was left behind while everyone else is evacuating. She tells him it's her job to apprehend whoever has been killing these monsters, but she'll make an exception to help Clover to safety. She asks his name, to which he answers forwardly. She promises to help him evacuate with everyone else and insists that she could never let a child get harmed in such a way. She reaches out to take hold of him. Clover hesitates, only a fraction of a second, briefly considering that perhaps she could be an ally. But he snaps back to focus just before she can touch him and draws his gun. "Hey, what are you doing?" Martlet asks in surprise. "There's no need for fighting now. We have to catch up to the others." Clover only barely hears the words as he mulls over what she had said before. She would never hurt a child. Did she promise the same thing to the ones that came before? And what did she call herself? A royal guard? She must work for the king. The same king who would kill every child that falls down. She's no better than the rest of them. He fires a bullet. Martlet doesn't even try to dodge. "Ow! What are you doing? I understand if you're scared, but you have to trust me. I'm with the Royal Guard. It's my job to make sure you're safe." Poor choice of words, Clover thinks, and fires again. Again, Martlet does nothing in retaliation. "Ow, ow, ow! Look, I get it. You're scared and don't know what to do. Everyone is, but you can't take it out on me." Clover's hand quivers, and he tilts his head further down to hide his eyes. "If you go around hurting everyone all the time, well, no one will ever help you." Clover's grip tightens again, and he fires once more. Still, Martlet is unshaken. "Hey, snap out of it," she yells. "Do you do this to everyone who tries to be nice to you?" And suddenly, realization floods Martlet's face. You do, don't you? You're the one they're all running from, aren't you?" For some reason, her saying this out loud ignites something in Clover. "Nice," she had said. As if any more than 3 monsters had been anything even resembling nice to him, attacking him at every chance they got and planning to send him off to a king that would kill him without a second thought. I don't know what to do. I've been so naive. You're just a kid." Fire burns in Clover's eyes beneath his hat. Just a kid. As if it makes a difference to them. Everyone who fell down here was just a kid. He fires again, now with feeling behind the pull of the trigger. "Well, I'll be honest with you. My handbook says nothing about this specific situation. However, I do know that something similar has happened before. They put a stop to that, so..." She throws the book aside and takes a fighting stance. "It's up to me to put a stop to this." And with that, she makes her first attack at Clover. This first run with Martlet is incredible because it really demonstrates how justified a Genocide run could be, while still not making any heavy-handed assumption about the player's decision to do it. Martlet is an unsure and kind of meek character. It's plausible that she would never kill a child, but the mere fact that she serves as a royal guard means that she is complicit to the idea of killing a child. You know, whether she actively supports the idea or not. This is what a good evil run of a game should do. Propose a moral dilemma in which the opposing side isn't necessarily free of all guilt. The line, "You're just a kid," I especially think is great because it's like she had a different expectation of what a human would be. And yet up to this point, we're all pretty well aware that it's exclusively children that fall down. She would have been ready to kill an adult, I guess, but a child is apparently too much for her to stomach. The reason I imagine Clover hesitates when the fight starts is that he can perceive that she genuinely believes she is a good person, which she does. It isn't until she makes up her mind that Clover is evil that Clover is suddenly ready to kill her, which, speaking of, as the two fight, Martlet does most of the talking, venting to Clover that he's something worse than a monster, because all he would have had to do is to ask any monster for help and they would have given it to him in a heartbeat. She can't see it, but her words only stoke the righteous flame of justice that burns in him. "I want you to know, I don't hate your kind. There's gotta be nice humans out there somewhere, or at least somewhat reasonable humans. I'd hoped that that was you." She pants between volleys of bullets and feathers. Clover grits his teeth beneath the brim of his hat and dodges her attacks. She lands back to the ground and scoffs. "You're still trying? Pretty determined there, aren't you? Luckily, so am I," followed by her fastest and most complex attack yet. Clover suffers scrapes and cuts, not to mention the frostbite of the freezing air around him, but his eyes are locked on his opponent, and her attacks are matched in kind with his bullets. Why won't you back down?" she growls, unleashing another attack. Clover dodges and shoots again. Martlet looks visibly tired and worn out from the fight as she unleashes one last attack. Clover survives the blow and fires once more. She loosens her stance and backs down. Okay. You win. I'm done attacking, so please, lower your weapon. Clover thinks for a moment, clearing his head and realizing what she's saying. He does so, glad, in some sense, that he hasn't needed to kill yet another monster. Like Martlet, he doesn't hate monster kind, but they have been free for too long under their delusion that their actions, their atrocities, can be justified by their bleak circumstances. Thank you. My handbook says this thing. There's no shame in a tactical retreat. I've never been sure what that applied to, but I think that time is now. Clover holsters his weapon entirely and turns his head away, as if hoping this unpleasantness will fade away if he stops looking at it. Martlet, as if reading his mind, continues sharply. You're not off the hook, Clover. Unless you decide right now to change your ways, the Royal Guard will find you. It could be me or someone much, much worse. How your life plays out from this moment is up to you. I don't know what humans taught you, but a child your age shouldn't be corrupted by violence, so please, please choose wisely. And with that, she leaves. Clover sits in silence, contemplating what she had said. In his heart, deep down, he knows that she's right. Maybe he thinks of his mother or his father, scolding him for being too rough with his little brother. Maybe he remembers a fight he got into at school. But whatever his thoughts, they're superseded by the pictures of the children on the missing poster. How scared and lost must they have felt? How many times had they cried, wishing their parents, or any other adult for that matter, would come and save them? He clenches his fist and tips his hat further down. Martlet was right. A child his age shouldn't be corrupted by violence. But he also knew that violence was sometimes the only way to stop people from being bad. If violence wasn't meant for children, then he'd have to grow up. He wasn't just pretending to be a cowboy now. In this moment, Clover resolved that he was a man, like the sheriffs and rangers he watched on TV. The moment he stepped from that spot in the snow, Clover was a different person than the one who came down here in the first place. The Martlet fight leaves such a strong impression because you don't actually have the ability to kill her. Clover chooses not to attack her, regardless of your intention as the player. This is the kind of moment in a Genocide run that gives weight to the player's choices. This moment where the character's will is displayed and it supersedes our will as the player. Because in that wordless exchange where Clover lowers his weapon, it's up to the player to consider why he might have done that. Him lowering the weapon is that could from before. And don't worry, this isn't the last we'll see of her. Flowey congratulates Clover, who, after just having matured several years in a single instant, has little to say in response to this childish talking flower. Flowey shows him a boat made by Martlet that would get him closer to the king. Clover boards and sets off without a second thought. Clover sits in contemplative silence on the boat ride, trying to wrap his head around what it now means to be the sheriff and the ranger he imagined that he was. Every monster who crossed him was now an outlaw, a bad guy, wanted dead, and he'd bring them all in. After all, that was justice all the same, wasn't it? His thoughts are interrupted by the current picking up and jetting him off into some tube and then finally off a cliff and into some cave. Fortunate to still be alive, he dusts himself off and continues. Maybe, while he was a child, it would have made him cry, but now he was a man, and men don't cry. Flowey greets him and suggests that the raft might have been a trap set by Martlet or some of the other monsters. Clover doesn't put much stock into this idea and ignores Flowey completely, continuing along the cave and exiting out the light into a familiar sight. A desert, just like where he'd grown up. A land straight out of the westerns he watched. Fitting that this was where his first run as a Texas Ranger would be tested. He straightens his belt buckle, clicks his boots against the ground, and heads out to dispense justice. The journey is the same gameplay-wise as the previous two, so I'll skip ahead. Just know that it's the same thing of killing monsters as we go. I also have a moment to disclose that, again, your reason for Clover choosing this might very well be different from mine. What's important is that it's very easy to merge your will to what we know and can infer about Clover as the story goes on. Very unlike how the Fallen Child works, because we're actually encouraged to care about Clover and how he traverses the world. As Clover continues, he stumbles across a familiar face. It's that raccoon creature from before, Mo. Mo, however, is not quite as happy to encounter Clover again. You're that human from Snowden. There's some pretty nasty rumors going on about you. Clover furrows his brow and slowly reaches for his gun. Then, shockingly, Mo's disposition lightens. But come on, we've all committed a few felonies in our time, right? For me, a pinch of petty theft, a sprinkle of tax fraud, diet crime. For you, disturbing the peace, battery, several homicides, allegedly. Clover can't help but smile at this strange raccoon's mannerisms. He's pleased, at least, that he's found a friendly face, even if it is a charlatan. Mo, a true showman, plays off this positive energy. Who's got proof, right? Gossip's gotta gossip. He continues, then waits in silence as if trying to conjure back up his act. Clover waits patiently for him to continue. So, you're probably thinking, what's this handsome cat selling? First of all, I ain't a cat, but I do appreciate the compliment. I had this whole spiel about water, but hey, for you, my best customer, I'll skip right to the premium inventory. He snaps his fingers, and from the wings, a decorated iced tea stand appears. Iced tea, baby, is like the sequel to water. So this is the part where you spend the G that may or may not belong to you, but hey, I ain't here to judge. I'm here to live. Clover, suddenly more at ease than when he had first showed up in this desert, happily hands over the money and buys the teas. Mo smiles and accepts the money. The alphabet must have 25 letters now, because I'm fresh out of tea. I'm sure we'll meet again. Thanks for believing in me. And with that, the stand shoos away, followed closely by Mo, who sends off with a Mo out. Clover nods at the novelty of it all, and hopes not to have Mo at the other end of his gun. He sets off again to dispense justice to this desert. As Clover carves a path in blood and lead across the east, he eventually comes across the mines. A miner storms past him. Hey, watch it! Clover glares up at the man from beneath the hat, and the man freezes in place. You, take care, I guess. Clover pushes past, feeling more and more like a grown-up with each person he encounters along the way. These mines pose no more threat to Clover than anything else. With every monster he kills, his sense of justice only becomes stronger and stronger. He finds a balloon which carries him up to the peak of the mountain, hopefully making this trek shorter, and at the top he meets Flowey. Heh, Asgore, Flowey muses. Monsters shower him with praise, but it's totally overblown. See, he's what they call a boss monster. Means he has special traits, more powers than others. When you inevitably kill him, his soul will stay intact, but only a moment before, boom, it's gone forever. I'll let you in on a little secret, though. In that short window of time, you can reach out and take his soul. With its power, you can break the barrier. Your back turned to the underground, your duties fulfilled. Doesn't that sound nice? Clover stares at Flowey, at this point certain that the flower simply does not understand his cause, nor does he owe Flowey an explanation for it. It's no longer just about leaving. If it were, he would have killed Martlet. It's about avenging the human souls that came before him, and doing it rightly. He stares, but makes no response. Yes? No? Flowey asks, frustration creeping into his usually chipper voice. Come on, give me something! Fine. You're becoming harder and harder to read, you know that? A little too broody for my taste, too. Just keep your eyes on the castle, okay? Clover turns from him and continues down the path. He walks past the false sun beating down on the desert below, pondering the righteousness of his quest, and suddenly his thoughts are interrupted by maracas? He continues, assuming it was just the wind, but then he hears it again, and suddenly before him, a masked creature. Halt! I, Albelador, have tasked myself with confrontation. The air is much too quiet, much too dreary. You make no noise when you move, and your eyes, they tell a wolf tale. No, this will not do. We must liven up this dismal atmosphere. It is time to dance! Clover grimaces, resting his hand on his holster. He has no time or cause to dance, nor will he until this nightmare is over. The creature continues. To truly find oneself, they must ignite a passion within. Let us duel! And with that, they are locked in combat. I want to see your spirit of fire, he challenges, and then music fills the air as beneath him a light board illuminates where he should step and when. Clover looks at the lights as they blink, and then back at El Velador. Another roadblock, Clover thinks, and fires. The dancer wants to see where his fire lies. He will find it burning at the other end of the barrel. Once again, the dancer tries to get him to play along with his game, but Clover is resolute. This is no game for him. Not anymore. This monster wants a duel? He'll have it. Another relentless shot which strikes true. This is fun, right? The dancer asks, his spirits falling ever so slightly. Clover furrows his brow. This was not fun. Nothing about this was fun. Perhaps at the start of this journey it might have been, but not now. Not after what he's been through. With the next shot, it seems to send the message as the dancer stops. Ha! A frown spreads across his face. The lights flash beneath Clover's feet as the two stare at each other, now coming closer to understanding whose will is stronger in their fire. Another shot. Ha! It says again, the light slowly and pathetically blinking once more. Another shot. Neither person says a word, and finally, after another shot, the creature speaks. I am sorry for inconveniencing you. El Bailador shakes his head. I was only trying to bring joy, but your attitude toward the art of dance is clear. With maybe a nod of acceptance, Clover unleashes the final shot, reducing the dancer to dust. He steps over the light board and shakes his head. He didn't have time for fun. He didn't have time for any of this. He needed to find those souls and dispense justice where it needed it most. Finding a balloon on the other side of the mountain, he takes it down, spreading justice as he goes until suddenly he is stopped by a familiar voice. There you are! Came Martlet's voice. I shouldn't have fled like I did, she says with a scowl. You kept going, kept destroying lives. This isn't self-defense like I once assumed. You're on a mission, but this warped sense of justice, it won't bring them back. Clover kept a stone face as she spoke, conscious and aware that his hand was nowhere near the holster. He would hear what she had to say until she struck first. After all, wouldn't that prove his point? Regardless of his willpower, it was hard not to scowl back at her. Was it self-defense when they killed those other children? He was on a mission, and he would see it through no matter what. I have reservations about the king's business just like you, but you don't have the context for those actions. I know. You want to believe the best in others, that the other humans were fully pacifist and didn't initiate. Clover's self-control waned for a moment. He would not stand by and let this monster try to justify the actions of the king. At best, she could have the same argument that he did. Isn't it her wishful thinking that every monster was just doing what they were told? Martlet steps back as Clover approaches. The Royal Guard are searching for you. Let me make that clear. You're lucky I'm the one who found you, so please listen. Clover waited, making a point to rest his hand now on the handle of his gun, but keeping shadowed eye contact with her. I've spent my life in skepticism, longing for eventual peace between our kinds. If you can believe it, I see goodness in you. Somehow, I still have hope you can turn it around. Clover's heart fluttered for a second, her words once again stoking memories of his family, his mother, or his older siblings telling him to be good. His hand moves off the handle, but his eyes remain cold and fiery. I can't apprehend you on my own. I already tried that, so please, stop this. Us monsters don't deserve, just as before the memories are replaced with the memories of the children's faces. Her sentence, us monsters don't deserve, snapped him out of these thoughts, and in a flash he drew his gun, already cocked and loaded, to end Martlet where she stood. A second's hesitation was all that saved her in that moment. Wait! Just listen. I didn't want to come to this, but I have to go. You won't get away with this, Clover. Clover's rage boiled inside of him. How dare this monster try to claim in any capacity that there was a contents in which it was acceptable to kill children. Monsters did deserve this. They deserve worse than this mercy he gave them. They deserve to rot here in the underground forever. But for now, his gun would have to suffice for justice. Putting the gun away, he marched onward to a deserted town where he got supplies and money he needed and kept going, still boiling with righteous indignation. This agony so palpable like a miasma around him that even Flowey had nothing to say about it. No little quips or jabs. And it was all the same to Clover. He wouldn't have wanted to hear them anyway. As he continues on this path, he finds something on the ground that causes him pause. There, in the dust of the road, is a gun. A real gun, not like the toy gun that he's been carrying around up to this point. A real, bullet-shooting, six-shooter cowboy big iron. Ahead, he sees a figure enshrouded by the mirage of the desert. But he can see well enough that this figure has a hat and a shawl. With a grim sense of irony, he picks up the gun, exchanging out the bullets from the toy into the real one. He wanted to be a ranger. This was his chance to live it. She told me to run, said the black-hatted gunslinger. She told me to hide, but nah. That ain't what a dignified sheriff would do. Clover lowered his hat in silence. This was the sheriff, eh? He knew what this was leading up to. He'd seen enough westerns to know, but he let him give his speech anyway. You see, I've heard you've been up to no good. You've been moseying around, terrorizing the nice folk of this underground settlement. You're an outlaw. My job, the sheriff seems to choke on his word, but holds his composure. My job is to bring justice upon folks like you. Folks who take pleasure in disturbing the peace. What a coincidence, Clover thinks to himself. My job is the same. Now, you have a method to what you're doing. You could have shot me by now, but you haven't. So how about we settle this fairly? Clover's face tenses. He knew this was coming. They would settle this by an old western draw. Fastest their weapon wins. Clover nods and stepped forward to the long road running lengthwise between them. He reckoned it was about 10 paces. He stepped aside for the sheriff to join him along the road. 10 paces, the sheriff says, as if reading Clover's mind. 1. Clover steps, feeling the weight of the new gun at his hip. 2. It was generous of the sheriff to give him a real gun, he thought. 3. It's a shame the sheriff doesn't have his story right. 4. It's a shame he doesn't know he's the outlaw. 5. That bird thinks she can tell me what's right. 6. What does she know? What do any of these monsters know? 7. Nobody around here knows what's what. 8. Nobody around here will just fess up. 9. 'Cause that's all it'll take. 10. Draw! And just like in the movies, with a swiftness folks back home would write songs about, in one fair shot, he got him. Right where his heart would be, if monsters had him. Clover was about to take off his hat. In fairness, this was how these duels went. It was brave, even just, that this monster would offer to settle it right then and there. But a voice broke in. Before we talk about the actual fight that happens here, I want to impact all of what we just witnessed. First of all, as I'm sure you've all surmised by now, Marlet is going to be the quote-unquote secret boss, and I will talk at full length about her at that point, but I can't talk about her right now. All I want to talk about right now is how perfect this build-up is for her. The reason she works as a villain is because she directly serves as the counter to our could, the whole basis of the Genocide route. But what is so brilliant about her writing is that the same arguments that she makes for why you shouldn't do a genocide run to solve the problem could be flipped back at her. She has made it clear that she has second thoughts about the king's willingness to kill kids, and yet she still wants to become a royal guard. She accuses Clover of being biased towards humans when she herself is obviously biased towards monsters. She pleads that monsters don't deserve this, but do humans? What did those particular humans do to deserve being killed? This is how you actually make the player feel conflicted about an evil playthrough, and how you make them actually care about these emotional moments, because they actually make you think instead of just condemning you for both committing the crime and not feeling anything for it. Speaking of emotional moments, the fight against Starlo here is beautiful, especially impactful if you don't know what happens in the pacifist run. In the pacifist run, you find out that Starlo is pretty much just like a big nerd who pretends to be a sheriff to be cool around his friends. He buys Clover a gun and basically makes him the deputy, but ultimately he pushes everyone away by being someone he isn't. And it's kind of sweet, but also kind of mushy. I think he's treated much better in the Genocide run because he actually gets to be the cool sheriff he claims to be. We actually see him do this, and not without any of the honor he would normally show. He gives this gun to Clover, knowing that this real gun could kill him if he loses. His own integrity and dedication to this image is so powerful that he makes himself the sheriff and goes out as a badass sheriff. What I think is even cooler about this is that Clover respects it. Even without the narrative that I'm stringing for you, the fact of the matter is, Clover does accept the duel. Why he does that is up for you to interpret, but it at least proves that unlike the fallen child, Clover isn't just some unfeeling psychopath. He's convinced himself somewhere or the other that what he's doing truly is justice, and it's our conviction as the player which serves as his reasoning for why we think he'd be doing that, which is a way more impactful tool in a narrative sense than just saying, oh haha, you're a murderer, ooh, isn't it cool and edgy to kill stuff because nothing matters, it's just a video game, dude. Clover watches as a new monster emerges, a fox-looking woman with bells and bows in her hair. She runs into town and sees the sheriff collapsed and bleeding. Starlo! She cries, running over to him. Clover watches, respectfully, allowing whoever this is to grieve and offering her a chance to walk away and leave him to his mission. Saroba, No, why didn't you listen? She gasped desperately. I almost won. The sheriff coughs grimly through blood. You did your best. You're the greatest sheriff in the underground, Starlo. You are. She closes her eyes, pressing her forehead into his. Thanks for playing along all these years. Now, do what's right. Deliver justice. He reaches out his hand for hers. She takes it as he fades away into dust. Clover watched the scene, inwardly shaking his head at the sheriff's last words. Deliver justice? It wasn't her place to do that. How could she possibly? But before he could even think another word, the fox was already charging at him, with fury in her eyes. Bursts of magical attack, stronger than anything Clover had ever faced, erupts around him. Each time it strikes him, he feels himself becoming weaker, as if it was sapping his very constitution. After the barrage concludes, the woman speaks. Why? Why have you done this? Is it because of some personal grudge? Your species already imprisoned us here. You won! I don't understand. Chujin was right all along. Humans want to rule over us, control our lives. Even if we freed ourselves, they would only wage war again. If only I stayed here and didn't run off, I could have protected She chokes on the sheriff's name. Enough talk. Starlo was the only friend I had left. What you've done is unforgivable. You will know the pain that you've caused. Clover grits his teeth as she speaks, his grip only becoming tighter and tighter around his gun with each word spoken. He didn't know anything about ruling monsters. That wasn't what he wanted. She would never understand. None of these monsters could possibly understand. He could agree with her on one thing. There had been enough talk, and it was time to show her the true meaning of justice. Saroba's fight serves as a stand-in for Undyne, and honestly, this is the one time I will concede that Undertale does something much better. Not that Saroba's fight is bad. The gimmick of losing max health is appropriately tough, the music tells a great story of heartbreak and blind fury, her design is very unique, but it lacks the tragedy of Undyne's fight. In fact, Saroba's fight only serves to support a cause for genocide because this is the first monster we meet who is outright hostile and kind of racist towards humanity. If ever there was a monster that needed to die in order for humankind to be safe, it was Saroba, which has its place, certainly. It's nice that there is indeed a moment in the Genocide run where our side of the could is what is outright expressed to us. We could justify the Genocide run by pointing to Saroba and saying, look, this is a powerful, high-ranking monster. She wants nothing more than to kill us without hesitation. She would kill every human that comes down here, and probably had something to do with one of the other children's death, and what's worse is, she feels good about that decision. Killing her would be justice. The fight rages on, neither side giving up and only growing more and more ferocious with each attack. But finally, Clover's skill wins the day, and Saroba is dropped to her knees. Clover holds the gun, still pointed at her. The shadow on his face growing darker as malice and hatred for all monster kind finally creeps its way into his mind. He turns his eyes away, trying to keep his mind focused on the justice he was meant to bring her, but her words are like oil to his fire. Look, she growls, her voice betraying how badly she actually is injured. Look at me, coward! The fruits of your labor! Clover raises his eyes back towards her, a white, hot rage behind his small eyes. Does this make you happy? Maybe if I were to beg for mercy, maybe you'll feel bad about your actions. No. The two sit in a tense silence for what feels like just a hair's breadth. Once you wipe us out, I hope you choke on the dust that fills the air. Clover readjusts the grip and stares down the sights, aiming directly at her shadowed face. In the meantime, go to hell, she spits with the last of her strength as she blows away as dust in the wind. Clover blinks. No thoughts go through his head. A silent but heavy ball of indignation grows and grows in his heart. He barely even notices as he walks to the saloon and steals everything without a second thought. It's as if his mind and body are split in two. His legs carry him, but all his thoughts can echo is one solitary thought. I hate. I hate. I hate! Flowey must have been able to read this emotion on Clover's face because, once again, he has no words to share with him. Good thing, too. A wrong word at this point, and Clover would tear the flower apart petal by petal with his bare hands. Instead, as a show of good faith, Flowey provides a case of his own special bullets. Bullets made from the monster's magic. Friendliness pellets, he calls them. Clover didn't even register a joke was being made and loads them into the gun. With any luck, it'd kill whatever he wanted dead, faster. Just on the outskirts of the town, his mind still racing with the same thing like a march, he passed a house. His body drags him to look inside, though it doesn't take him long to realize that this was the sheriff's old house. He leaves before his mind forces his body to do anything unnecessary. He continues in heated silence until finally Flowey breaks this silence. Howdy! Regular monsters are one thing, but that fox lady was a real piece of work, huh? If you bested her, Asgore doesn't stand a chance. Now, he turns Clover's attention to the giant locked vault at the end of the path. I'm not too sure how to open this door. Flowey thinks. Clover's mind suddenly wrenches control of his body and in one swift moment blasts the control panel of the vault. The mechanism erupts in spark, but the door springs to life and hums open. Sure. That works. See you up ahead, Clover, Flowey says sarcastically, and the two enter the vault. He enters, and the door slams closed behind him. The vault is dark and empty. Strange technology lines the walls and floors. He continues, paying it little notice, until he comes to a large foyer with a large, big, clunky machine in the middle. Howdy, Flowey says with less enthusiasm than he usually brings. This area seems totally abandoned. Guess there's no more need for fighting. Real shame. Clover says nothing, his hands still clutching the gun from when he shot it before. A generator, huh? There's probably some way to turn it back on around here. Before Flowey can finish, Clover points the gun at the machine and fires into the panel, shooting sparks everywhere. Oh, come on, again? Flowey growls impatiently. Hate to rock your world, but bullets aren't the answer to everything. Would it kill you to think before shooting your problems? Clover's mind snaps to attention to Flowey's tone. He steps forward towards the flower, turning his shadowed eyes to meet Flowey, who shrinks back ever so slightly. Hey, it's just a pattern I've noticed recently. You've already solved tons of puzzles on your journey. I was only curious why your patience had suddenly worn so thin. Clover's glare did not subside. Cool it, will ya? Clover lowers his gun into the holster, but steps towards Flowey all the way, staring into his soulless eyes for a moment before turning and walking past the generator to the other side of the room, where another door is closed before them. Heh, I'm afraid that this door is far too thick to shoot down, Flowey laughs nervously. Looks like you'll have to stick to my original plan of... Flowey stops as he notices what Clover was doing. Without taking his eyes off the door, Clover pointed. Finally pulling his eyes from the door, but without turning his head, he glares at Flowey and points harder. What? Me? You found yourself some nerve, haven't you? Clover turns his head all the way now, forcefully moving his arm with a point in the direction of the door. Fine, Flowey eventually says with a frown. Vines crack through the sides of the room and tear the door open with ease. There. Your exit, my king, Flowey rolls his eyes with sarcasm. Clover turns his head back menacingly towards Flowey, who keeps his tone of unabashed superiority. Did you forget my warning when we started down this road? I'm in control here. That hasn't and won't change. Got it? The next time you pull a stunt like this... Let's just keep moving. I am really liking how Flowey is presented in this game. Like, a lot. I'll hold my tongue about it for now, but suffice it to say, the Flowey that we see now is obviously a much different Flowey than the one we found in the ruins. One might even say a more true-to-himself Flowey. Clover continues through the abandoned laboratory, his rage boiling hotter than the lava around him, and his need to unleash it getting greater and greater with each moment he is left alone with his thoughts. Up some stairs, past some hallways, he barely takes notice of his surroundings, until suddenly a sound stops him. A metal door torn open and a robot emerging through the hole. A robot calling himself Axis Model 014, a guardian of some kind whose protocol seems to have caught Clover's behavior and presence in the factory. Threat level 10. Empathy bypassed. Clover tries hard to focus. Now was no time for impulse. Welcome to the Steamworks, human, the robot drones, its eyes now pulsing with red light. Things have not gone your way, have they? I'm afraid what you are after has... Clover's blood begins to boil again, even without knowing what this robot will say next. He knows. Expired, the thing finally buzzes. 5 souls are all that await you if you reach the castle, but I'm guessing you pieced that together already. Clover says nothing, but his fingers begin to twitch as he rests his hand on the grip of his pistol. It is interesting. Humans and monsters, while different, do share one thing, a hunger for the soul of the other. I suppose that is no different here. Suddenly, a flash of revelation crosses Clover's face, though only his eyes betray it. His hand remains gingerly pressed on the pistol at his hip. My usual protocol calls for mere apprehension, but your threat level permits me to initiate attack. Axis raises its arms and creates a ball of magical energy. Stand down, human. It will all be over soon. Draw! Flashes through Clover's head, and in a flash, the pistol spins into his hand and 3 shots ring out. 1 in the chest, 1 in the arm, and 1 in the head. Clover watches as the sparks and oils of the robot spray out in lieu of its blood. He puts the gun in his holster, prepares to move on. Unfortunately, the robot pulls itself from the wall with a horrible buzz. Damage critical. Threat level 99999999999999999999999. Clover watched in a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. The robot hadn't died. What a perfect way to get out this murderous hatred he had, killing machines that had no soul but could still feel. I remember now, the robot hisses. The others, I must evacuate. Clover, always quick on the draw, goes for another burst, but before he could pull the trigger, a trapdoor opens beneath Axis and sends him away. He slowly puts the gun away, and his heart, which once burned with hatred, now erupts with malicious glee. It was a hunt now, and he'd make these robots suffer. And sure enough, on the other side of the door that the robot had come from, robots galore, dozens of them, each busy toiling away at whatever job they were doing before this place fell into disrepair. Clover tears into them with his gun, each exploded robot serving to quell the hurricane in his mind by a little bit more. He makes his way through the steamworks until he comes upon a strange empty island in the sea of lava. He makes his way to the center of it, and from the sidelines slides in Mo. BAM! You know who it is, right? It's your boy, and without thinking, Clover pulls out his gun, aiming it straight at Mo's chest. Mo's face falls. Mo. Hey, buddy. What's with the peace? I thought we had a connection, you know? Like some sort of vaguely illegal partnership. You don't think I'm going to stab you in the back, do you? Clover's mind races, some of the residual hatred for all monster kind bubbling up once again. It wasn't enough for him to pull the trigger, however, but it was getting harder and harder not to with each passing second. I may be many things, but the last thing I am is a snitch, Mo continues coolly. Clover steps forward, his gun not wavering. Hey! There ain't nothing up my sleeve, kid. Nothing but fur and admittedly cheap cologne. What you see is what you get with Mo. I ain't some unassuming badass waiting for a chance to unleash an attack. I'm just a salesman, alright? I'll leave, just put down the gun. Mo's voice is desperate, but sincere. Clover's heart, in a single moment, spoke loud enough to interrupt the hate-fueled thoughts of his brain. Of all the monsters in the underground, Mo is the only one who has not obstructed the justice we bring. It is not justice to kill this monster. And so, Clover lowers the gun. Grief, and perhaps regret, washing across his eyes as he tips his hat down to hide the look on his face from Mo. Okay. We're cool, right? You know, I'm just gonna take my opportunity and get out of here. I think I've had enough of this lifestyle. And with that, Mo sails off, away from Clover, forever. This is why Mo is my favorite character in Yellow. Specifically, he's my favorite character in the Genocide run because he's literally the only friend that Clover has in the Genocide run. I don't care if it's as a customer. Mo respects Clover and has no intention of changing his ways. He doesn't care what Clover's philosophy for what he's doing is, whether it's right or wrong, whether it's just or unjust. He would be there for Clover regardless, so long as Clover is willing to pay for it. The choice to rob him or not is one of the moments that actually makes the player consider their actions, because Mo has been nothing but helpful to us at this point. And it's because we've seen that Clover isn't just a murder hobo who can make decisions without us that this choice becomes even more profound. Clover is conflicted. He doesn't know which he should do, but it's important to note that neither choice is to kill him. Should Clover treat Mo with contempt, or should he let him live out the rest of his days in an underground that is completely empty? Either way, Clover has resolved not to kill Mo, whether out of honor, respect, or just unwillingness to betray someone who hasn't wronged him in any way besides being a monster. Even to the last moment, Mo doesn't try to preach at Clover that he needs to change his ways or that the path that he's on is dangerous. In a lot of ways, Mo is a kindred spirit to Clover, doing what he sees as right, going his own way and living with the consequences. If ever there was someone in this genocide run Clover could ever think of as a friend, it was Mo. Clover turns away, his heart sighing with relief that he has proved, in that moment, that he isn't just a heartless murderer like these monsters claim him to be. And maybe, just maybe, Mo will go on to tell the other monsters that Clover was a man of justice and integrity, and that so long as they change their ways and don't kill children who fall down, they're deserving of some kind of mercy. Regardless, it doesn't take long for the destruction of the robots to satiate his raging bloodlust once again. Continuing down the path, he spots his prey, and the rage burns with the same fire it did once before. Axis rumbles slowly and lopsidedly through a dark corridor, and Clover enters only a few paces behind him. Axis notices and buzzes harshly, "No! Retreating!" and as fast as his motors can carry him, zooms down the hall. Clover gives chase, his heart pounding and his stride going stronger and stronger with each foot he closes in distance to the fleeing robot. He wonders between thoughts of how he'd like to maim this thing, if these robots could feel fear, and if they even cared about justice beyond what was programmed within them. These thoughts only serve to booster his resolve to catch and destroy this thing. Axis turns a corner, and Clover loses him. He swears under his breath, but continues in his mission to kill every single robot along the way. Flowey interjects. "Can I be real with you? I'm gonna be real with you. I get it. Stomping around, full of anger or boredom, laying waste to everything in your path. We all have hobbies, but come on. How is this forwarding your cause? These aren't monsters. As far as I'm concerned, they're barely even conscious. You don't have time for this little joyride of yours." Clover furrows his brow at Flowey, who then quickly adds, "In my opinion, of course." Clover, for the first time since entering this place, and perhaps even for the first time since coming to the underground, considers Flowey's words. In truth, this had just been catharsis, a way to wring out the anger he felt towards these monsters. Was it justice to feel such blind hatred? Could justice even exist in the same place as hatred? He didn't know. But he knew he would finish what he started. Flowey watched this contemplation wash over Clover's face with increasing impatience. "Fine, we'll talk later, I guess." Clover continues, a few rooms of dead robots later, and Flowey speaks again. "What? You want me to keep inflating your ego? This was novel back in Snowden, but now... I don't know. Aren't you bored?" Clover, still considering Flowey's words, reflects. Was it ever about fun in the first place? How did he feel back in Snowden? Scared, lost, conflicted, never amused, however. Clover reminds himself again in this moment that Flowey doesn't understand why he's here. He's never understood from the first moment they met. This killing has never been about fun or fulfillment. It was about justice. It still is. Clover assures himself, the anger cooling to a low flame. Once again, Flowey impatiently watches Clover mull over his thoughts and hurries to the end of the one-sided conversation. "Right," he closes. Clover continues down the hallway, where he finds Axis speaking as softly as his damaged vocal chip can manage. "Stay put, okay? You're safe," it coos to another robot who, upon seeing Clover, quickly sinks away into the floor. Clover disregards the hidden robot. Nobody here has understood that it was really only the king and anyone who defended his actions he was after. He remembers the horde of robot that he just killed outside and considers, just for a moment, that perhaps they didn't need to die, but buries such a thought immediately. These robots were made by monsters who would kill children if their king wanted them to. And he did. They were programmed with the same morality and therefore must die. Still, if a robot didn't cross his path, he wouldn't lose sleep over its continued mundane existence. He tracks Axis down to a chemical lab, where once again, he loses him. Flowey waits for him deeper into the lab with scathing sarcasm. "Wow, I am constantly astonished by your abilities. The skill it must have taken to shoot a bunch of tin cans. Just inspiring," Flowey adds with a wink. Clover takes a deep breath, ignoring the disingenuous comment. He knows, at this point, that killing these robots is futile. The white-hot coals of his soul have now dwindled away to the point where, at this point, he's only killing these robots because he feels he has to. He can't stop now, or else it would discredit all the other ones he'd killed moments before. In the next room, he finds a door with a massive lock and assumes, rightly, that Axis has hid himself behind it. Sure enough, he can hear the robot's voice when he approaches the door. "This door is sealed, so leave us alone. Please. I know why you are here, but I can explain." Clover pulls his gun out and shoots at the lock. Futile or no, he would kill Axis. He had come too far for anything less. And of all the robots here, it's most likely that Axis had something to do with even one of the children who died here. They seem to know an awful lot about them, at least. Brute force won't solve anything. Try all you like, but the steam works. All of us. We are survivors. Flowey interjects. He's gone. What do you plan now? The door's beyond my ability, so don't look at me. Clover turns toward the door, leading to the rest of the factory. Perhaps there was some tool to break through the door. Flowey, as if reading Clover's mind, chimes in with, I already checked it. The factory ring, right? Yeah, place has more locks than a hair salon. Clover looks grimly and tiredly at Flowey. It's called humor? Don't suppose you've heard of it. Geez, and I thought I was soulless. Okay, let's see. Flowey grumbles, looking around. Well, there's certainly a lot of junk lying around. I know you're on a strict shoot, don't think regiment, but for once, you're gonna have to get creative. Distressing, shocking even, I know, but I've seen you work your brain before, so give it a shot. Flowey ends with a patronizing look before leaving. Clover looks around, giving consideration to what he's seen lying around. He remembers vaguely his older sibling talking about their chemistry homework with someone. Something about acid melting metals. How do you make acid? He looks at the array of items around. Balloons, noisemakers, cakes, beach balls, and of course, various chemicals lying around. He makes his way to one of the cupboards and grabs the strongest smelling chemical he can find. Chlorine, it says on the side. He brings the chlorine up to a big machine with a hole in it that's perfect shape and size for the container that he's holding. For lack of a better solution, Clover places the container in the slot and the computer whirs to life, accepting the chemical. He must be on the right track to making something. It needs another compound, it says, so he looks around for another one, a container of a similar shape, and the first one he sees has a big H on it. Hydrogen, it reads. He takes the container and just as a guess puts it into the machine. To his surprise, the machine accepts. The process of actually mixing them is really some sort of game. Without even so much as a smile, Clover takes the liquid, the memory of home only serving to fill his heart with justice even further. He pours the acid on the roadblock and continues grimly. The factory is empty now. There are no sounds but the clacking of his boots against cold steel, and the occasional beep or hum of some kind of machine clinging to its life. He makes his way to the heart of the lab. If that damned machine was anywhere, it'd be there. And sure enough, he finds Axis. It's back against the wall, waiting for Clover to come and end everything. I did all I could, it buzzed weakly. I was only able to save a few, but now I know you will leave this place unsatisfied. The same fate may await me, but I will no longer run from you. The cannon of death you wield is strong, Axis drones, then moves to take up a trash can lid as a shield. But as you can see, I have drawn a weapon of my own. Now, as the kids say, come at me. The fight could barely be called that. Clover knows from the start that all it would take is one shot to send this robot to its maker, but for whatever reason, that trash can lid is impervious to his attacks. All that is left to do is outlast a machine, but he was capable of it. The only thing which drives him forward are the remains of those bloodthirsty thoughts. Finish what you started. One shot is all it takes, rings through his mind. Eventually, through the barrage of attacks, Axis lets up. Clover takes the opportunity to fire at the shield in hopes that it will accomplish anything. How long are you going to do this? Another shot. My shield is impervious to your bullets, so you should give up. Another shot. And anyway, as I said before, I can explain everything to you. Another shot, this time with feeling. Clover didn't care for any explanation this machine could possibly have. He knew it wouldn't be justification enough. You see, I do not have the freedoms you have. Another impassioned shot. Clover could not be lectured on the nature of free will. Not now, not in this context. My programming, I had no choice. Suddenly, something snaps within Clover. He lowers his gun, staring in a mixture of disbelief and revelation. I was forced to neutralize that human, clearly intoned from the robot's chip, as if it were the only thing that it had been programmed to say, despite all of its damage. Clover's heart, no. His soul suddenly resonated. It was no longer rage, or hatred, or grief, or confusion, or anything he had felt until now. For the first time, he had become fully and totally convinced of his role in this place. His body, tired and aching from the long and difficult fight, suddenly surged with energy. He straightened up, putting the gun in its holster. He might have even laughed if it wasn't such a miserable revelation he had come to. Axis suddenly shrunk back, clearly seeing a change in Clover. "Wait!" it protested. "What's going on?" Clover's soul, manifested as the yellow heart he had seen throughout his journey, suddenly began to swell with an incredible energy. Deep down, Clover knew what this was. It was justice. Pure, raw, objective justice, which he had only now come to wield in its fullest extent. Unleashing this blast, it shattered the shield into 1,000,000 pieces. Just the sight of such power fills him with more of this justice. Axis, now in panic, confirming what Clover had wondered all those moments ago. This robot now felt fear, and rightly so. That is the response of the wicked when faced with true justice. "Hold on, please, I'm sorry," Axis pleaded. Clover's soul swelled with power once again. It was too late for these pleads of mercy. No choice. No choice, the thing had said to him. There was always a choice, and if it wasn't Axis's, then it was the choice of the monster that made him. He had no doubts anymore, no reservations about having killed all those monsters or any of those robots. These monsters all believed they had no choice but to commit these horrid sins, and why? Because they were sad? Because they had lost all hope? Saroba was wrong. This wasn't about humans and monsters. He knew that now more than ever. This wasn't about a war fought ages ago. This was about the truth. About doing what was right, about justice, and his soul now surged with justice, stronger than ever. "I didn't want to," were the last words Axis could sputter out before being eviscerated in the pure and awesome strength of justice. Clover stared at the robot, now torn in two, his heart now eased. He felt calm. For the first time since coming into the underground, he felt good, at peace even. It was as if his soul had been asleep and only now had it awoken, speaking to him with the gentleness and firmness of every person he has ever loved. This moment of reflection was interrupted by Flowey, who watched in horror. "What was that? Clover, what?" Clover wouldn't have answered even if Flowey had let him, but Flowey only continued his own thoughts. Okay. No, this is fine. This can be really useful against the king. But Clover had no interest in listening to Flowey babble about killing the king. It wasn't his goal. The king could still be redeemed. If only he recognized that all of this death, all of this justice was because of him. Then, and only then, would Clover consider the souls alone a fitting payment, forever sealing these horrid monsters away from humanity, never to harm any human ever again. But that was if the king was capable of such a thing. In which case, the same fate awaited him. Flowey called after Clover, who was leaving. "Wait! Where are you going? I'm still talking!" But his words fell on deaf ears. Wow. Okay, the lab is a crazy area. I didn't want to interrupt the narrative because I would have been stopping after pretty much every line of dialogue. First of all, I'll start with, even though my narrative seems to play up how angry Clover is at the start, it's very apparent that he is of a different temperament at the start and end of the zone. Again, it's the benefit of allowing the character to have a personality outside of the player. It doesn't alienate or even restrict the player's ability to connect with the character because it allows the player to roleplay, or at the very least, try to picture how the character is feeling. Compare how Clover acts at the generator with how the Fallen Child acts with Monster Kid, which is about the only time the Fallen Child does something without R explicitly doing so. At face value, these interactions are roughly the same. Act aggressive and mean at something that really hasn't done anything to us. But consider what we know about Clover up to that point. We've seen him show restraint before. We've seen him choose mercy before. We can assume that even if our control of him stopped right after Saroba and the rest of the game played out as a movie, he would still have done things like that. The Fallen Child, on the other hand, has shown no initiative and therefore no will of their own. If our control of the Fallen Child stopped after Papyrus, I'm not sure that they would do that to Monster Kid. What reason does the Fallen Child have to kill stuff after the ghost telling them to kill stuff leaves? Secondly, I think it's incredibly smart that none of the robots increase your LV or EXP. It tells the story of what those things are better than Sans just staring you dead in the face and explaining it to you. It tells a story that something about LV and EXP are related to the presence of a soul, or at the very least, the posture of the soul that is doing the killing, which makes the jump to 19 LV at the Axis fight all the more exciting because not only is it, number go up, but it illustrates that something is different about Axis or about Clover that has caused this power-up. If you believe it's something about Axis, then it justifies the Genocide run that this creature, which has a soul, claims to have had no choice, but indeed has the ability to choose. And if you believe something changed about Clover, then it just bolsters the argument that Clover is in fact justified in what he's doing, or at least believes in his own heart that he's justified in doing it, because it's literally the power of justice that is giving him that strength. Gameplay has merged with storytelling in a way that is actually thought-provoking, instead of just being a narrative subversion of a gameplay convention. Finally, Axis is a great boss for this area for two reasons. The first being it introduces a new mechanic in an interesting way. I'll point out that every boss up at this point has done such a thing to a better effect than in Undertale, and especially in the Genocide run. Instead of the fight being kill Axis, it's about surviving Axis. Axis is on the defense, and yet it's actually you that needs to beat his endurance. Secondly, it introduces a metric for justice, because it is Axis who causes Clover to gain the Justice Blast. We now have a way to say what is and isn't considered justice, or at least as far as the Genocide run is concerned. Justice is the payment for your accountability for your actions. In other words, if you believe that you should not be held accountable for your actions, that the accountability lies on someone else, then justice is against you. Clover is just because he accepts the accountability for only what he does. He knows that he's killing things and would answer for it if he had the ability to speak. Mo is just because he doesn't try to claim to be anything he isn't. He doesn't try to tell Clover that monsters aren't bad or that only humans would do something this horrible. If anything, Mo is held accountable for the bad things he does, and so Clover has no issue with him. Saropa, on the other hand, is as far away from justice as she could possibly be. She refuses to admit any fault of monsters. She believes that it was right and good to kill humans because humans have not been held accountable for what they did to monsters. Axis is what caused the revelation in Clover because he claims he was programmed to kill them. That wasn't a choice to do that, even though right now, Axis was choosing not to kill Clover. It's this hypocrisy which leads Clover to understand the true meaning of justice, or again, at the very least, how the game defines justice. And again, this is in very stark contrast to Undertale. Defining the bounds of the key phrase and concept allows the player to engage with the story in a much more meaningful way than just a fourth wall break that says, oh yeah, you have determination because you played through this boring, tedious, and really difficult playthrough. Just this one moment that isn't even explained tells a more touching and impactful story to the player because they can actually understand what is happening in the story. It's a difference in consumer comprehension comparable to Toy Story versus Food Fight. Toy Story does a pretty good job of explaining the bounds of its universe, that the toys play dead whenever humans are around, without ever really there being a scene where a toy goes, we have to do this every single time. And when they break that rule, like with Sid, it's, there's a logical reason. They explain why this rule doesn't apply to this situation. In the movie Food Fight, which is a horrible mess of a narrative, they don't explain how the Ikes actually work. In fact, they barely even explain the concept of what an Ike is, and yet play by these rules and expect the viewer to be able to follow along. It is so unknown to the viewer that they might as well disassociate whenever that convention is being played with. The scene where they go into the real world, I don't care because I don't know the rules. No one set these rules up for me to understand, even just contextually, what this is supposed to mean. Clover walks away from the factory, his soul resonating within him. Need to find an exit, his soul seems to say calmly. He walks onward and finds an old elevator shaft. Through those doors, his soul assures. He takes the elevator and follows the path to the foot of what appears to be a massive tower, the base of which seems to be some kind of hotel in construction. Flowey greets him in the lobby. Wow, sure is quiet around here. This is what you get when you toss out subtlety, waging war without a care for repercussions. I tried to warn you, but it's too late now. Play it cool from here on out, will ya? But Clover only half listened. He felt something strange when he was around Flowey. Like there was a power just out of reach that it only took the smallest push to overtake. He walked past and took the food from the concessions at the hotel desk. Among the accoutrements is a patch bearing the insignia of some kind of holy symbol to the monsters. A delta rune, a symbol for unwavering hope of all monsters. He wore it with a sense of irony. If there was any hope for monsters, it was him and his justice which would set them right. He took what he wanted and made his way to the back alley, where he knew Martlet would be waiting. The end lies beyond, his soul hums as he follows the blue feathers left behind towards a balcony overlooking the core. "So, you found me," she says, a cool flame of anger burning behind her eyes. "Pretty easy when there's so few left." Clover drew his gun and pointed it. In this moment, he would give her one last chance to see the error of her ways, to admit that the king is wrong and that monsters should just stay in the underground, humble and just in their being so. "Not wasting any time, huh?" Martlet scowls. "You know, my whole life," she begins, not taking her eyes off Clover. "My whole life, I was taught that humans are the enemy. The truth stared right at me, but I chose to look away." Her voice gives a faint quiver, as if she were on the verge of tears. Clover clenches his teeth. This was the wrong thing to say to him, but still, he waited. "I tried to see the good. I wanted to believe it wasn't true, but you... Any ounce of good you had is 6 feet under." Clover tightens his grip. "I don't care if your motivation was noble. I don't care if it was only your twisted idea of fun. Nothing can justify your sins." Clover says nothing, earnestly hoping that Martlet would hear her own words and speak them to herself. "I ran," she finally says again. "Twice I could have done something different. Tried harder, prevented so many deaths, but I knew that chance was slim. I'm far too limited in my current state. But now, this is my responsibility alone," she says, the fire in her eyes now igniting to a roar. She pulls from her pocket a syringe full of a white liquid. With fury in her eyes and steel in her veins, she glares at Clover. "You should have finished me when you had the chance." Clover watches as she rams the syringe into her arm, shuddering and gasping before falling to the ground. Clover's trigger finger twitches, slightly, but still does not shoot. "Clover," she growls between pants, "your terror ends now!" Before his eyes, her body begins to liquefy and morph, stretching and squashing in a horrible, unnatural way until suddenly, as if tearing out from under her skin, a new form like a phoenix, made from stardust, screams out from her body. Clover's soul readies itself to face off against the zenith of monster kind. Now, he would truly fight a worthy enemy. Holy shit! Martlet's fight is so fucking cool. This is how you do a Genocide final boss. Fuck Sans. Yeah, I'll say, fuck Sans. Fuck Megalovania. Fuck his entire stupid build-up to getting to him, and fuck his stupid special attack, because this is what I want my final boss to be. The music is just the perfect climax to everything Clover and the player have been feeling up to this point. I don't need to convince you with classical music theory about what this song is about and how you're supposed to feel. I can't even put to word what it's about. You just gotta feel it. Feel the gravity of the entire galaxy collapse around you while you fight in the name of justice against the last true bastion against it. Martlet's design is just, oh my god, it's magnificent, it's beautiful, it's menacing, it's mesmerizing, it's righteous, it's evil. The galaxy on her wings, the way that this fight is colored, the first phase of this fight itself being entirely done with the soul instead of with the gun to symbolize that it's truly Clover's sense of justice against Martlet's. I will finally talk about Martlet as a whole in a moment, but first, this battle is truly legendary. Clover's soul filled now more than ever with a sense of intense justice, with each passing moment where once he might have had a thought of fear or conflict or anger, now his soul reassured him. The enemy can't last forever, it says, and each second he's given a moment of remembrance is taken, to remember what has brought him here and why, to remember everyone he's killed, to remember what they did to deserve it. They fight, exchanging no words, exchanging no looks. They are no longer beings, but forces of anathema. Each second the two exist in the same place is a moment that nature itself is defied. Their fight tears through everything around them, but neither party cares. Every monster in the underground knows what's happening, and either party would want it no other way. This was the fight to end all fights. This was the end. Finally, after countless attacks and Justice Blast, her armor shatters, and in that moment of weakness, something curious happens. Clover's soul reaches out to touch something, like a memory, a confession. Without fighting the sensation, Clover takes hold and witnesses her perspective in its complete objectivity. It's a memory of Martlet and another monster discussing something. It seems that this is a memory from when she first became a royal guard. The monster there with her is outwardly disapproving of her decision, citing that she will eventually have to deal with humans. Martlet seems unconcerned with the prospect of encountering a human, stating first that it's incredibly rare that she would be the one to deal with a human, and even if she did, she would just reason with them to make their way to the king. The other monster has an outburst that humans are dangerous, stating that the last human to come through here massacred Snowden. Not to mention, the few survivors of the ancient war have stories about how powerful and cruel humans can be. Martlet doesn't want to believe that all humans are bad, but the other one insists that they are. Martlet then reveals that she hasn't even posted where humans would be. Instead, she serves as a bodyguard for Alphys, the royal scientist, putting her almost entirely out of harm's way. The memory then shifts to her work in that field, serving under the lead scientist, where she convinces herself that if she does ever meet a human, she'll need a backup plan, disappearing into the lab. "What do you think you're doing?" Martlet snaps as Clover is pulled from the memory. "Searching for a reason to hate me?" Neither Clover nor his soul have anything to say in response. "Strange. You didn't need a reason when killing the others," she spat with newfound determination in her voice. "I bet you feel real accomplished right now. But the only thing you've managed to accomplish is pissing me off even more." She stands to her feet, ready to fight. "There's only one way this ends," she says dryly. "And right now, I feel invigorated. Good luck." And then starts Martlet's second phase. Again, a million times better than anything in Undertale, and an actual good use of the concept of injecting determination. Unlike Undyne, this new form is actually noticeably more powerful, giving her completely new abilities and actually putting her on par with a human's ability to fight. Undyne didn't become more powerful, she became faster. If she was in her determined form when fighting the human right when the human fell down, the human might have been able to beat her given enough time. If Martlet had been in this form when she first met Clover, he'd have been dead the moment he tried to shoot his toy gun at her. This is the boss that actually makes use of the fact that the player and the character have both gotten more powerful. And okay, now that we've finally seen that Justice vision, or whatever that was, it's never actually explained what that is, so I just kind of headcanon that it's like a confession before a judge, an ability unique to Justice souls like how Undying and Saving are to Determined souls. We can finally talk about Martlet as a whole. Martlet is the best written character in Undertale Yellow's Genocide run. As I mentioned before, she represents the other side of our could, but more importantly than that, she's our equal in terms of her understanding of justice and the world at large. She and Clover both encounter each other having a bias towards the other's kind. A bias not founded on personal experience, but on what they were told or learned about the other's kind. Both believe that their own kind are naturally good people because they're naturally good to them. They both have patience and respect for the other, even to the very end. Martlet is on the other side of justice, and in this final form, she matches Clover shot for shot in both his resolve for justice and his determination. I don't think it's accidental that her attacks, which were once white, are now the color of determination, yellow. Sure, it's a visual indicator that they can be shot, but it's also significant that now, more than ever, she's fueled by justice, just as Clover is. Deep down, Martlet wishes that this wasn't the way that things happened. She wishes that Clover lived up to her hopes for what a human could be like. Likewise, Clover likely hoped that monsters would be understanding of his quest, and that more would take his cause. Even as Martlet was imagining being a royal guard, she purposefully leaves out what escorting a human entails. And not only does she leave it out, she ignores it entirely. Of course a human can't be reasoned with or escorted when you're leading them to their certain death. And of course monsters won't just surrender the human souls, because doing so would mean that the monsters are stuck down there forever. Martlet is a true antagonist to the Genocide run because she is the exact same as Clover in every way except one. She is a monster. The fight continues, and with no less fury from either side. Clover's soul having grown so powerful it no longer even needs to be healed by natural means. Just the will to endure is enough for his soul to refresh itself. Martlet, on the other hand, begins to break down, her body growing more and more viscous with each bolt of justice she suffers. Why is it wearing off? Why is it wearing off? I don't want to die, I need more time! She cries as the battle rages on. Closure. Finality. Clover's soul resonates as it continues to endure. You can't win! You can't! Martlet's voice begins to garble and break, her body now nearly entirely melting like ice in the hot sun. Home, Clover's soul says, nearly as a whisper, as Clover pulls out his gun and in one final shot pierces Martlet's melting flesh. Then, there is silence as her body pulsates. She whimpers in pain briefly, only enough to grind out a few words.
How many more? How many until you're satisfied? We only took 5. You've gotten dozens!
Clover stares in silence. Maybe before such a phrase would have stirred him to wrath, but not now. He knew better now.
You aren't just! All you are is a self-serving maniac! I hope you...
But before she can finish, her body rapidly begins to melt away.
No! She shouts in horror, please!
But to no avail. Her hair, which once flowed like cosmic winds, now cling together like a cowl of sludge to her viscous skin.
What do I do?
She pleads desperately. Clover says nothing, holstering the weapon and waiting for justice to work itself out. Her body turns pale white, and with one eye peering out from the massive amalgamate, she calls out again,
Stop!
Her flesh sinks into the earth as a puzzle.
Someone help me!
Her voice garbling and warping again, screaming and crying as her face melts into the rest of her oozing body before finally the massive ooze collapses and fades away into dust. Clover's soul accepts this as a victory and becomes stronger still. At last, Clover has achieved justice, and there was one last thing to do. Before he could do this, however, Flowey stops him.
Great! This is just great!
Flowey roars after an awestruck silence.
Do you know how much attention this will bring on us? The entire underground is gonna put up its defenses. I'm sure the castle's on full lockdown by now thanks to your recklessness.
Clover stares at Flowey, unconcerned, unbothered by what this pathetic creature has to say in protest of his righteous work. No.
This won't do. You are gonna make this right. Got it?
Make it right, Clover thinks. I have made it right.
You may have a shiny new ability, but that doesn't change a thing. Go to the castle, smash its walls down, tear it apart, do whatever it takes to get my souls!
Clover suddenly snaps to attention upon hearing those words. His souls, huh? Flowey, realizing that Clover has caught the slip-up, quickly tries to correct.
Hey now.
Clover calmly but swiftly draws his gun, giving Flowey one last chance to correct himself.
I meant your souls, you know that,
Flowey says disingenuously. It isn't enough. Clover pulls the hammer.
You idiot! What do you think you're doing?
Flowey shouts. Clover takes aim. His soul suddenly reaches out and takes hold of that feeling it had before. Clover's determination would not be outdone by some conniving, evil, cruel thing as Flowey.
Fine! Looks like this is another dead end, Flowey spits.
And then, nothing. Flowey looks shocked. And then, nothing. Flowey looks even angrier. Again and again, it's as if Flowey is trying to reach out for something that wasn't even there in the first place, and he is more and more furious with each failed grasp.
What is this?
He finally gives voice to this frustration.
What's going on, you little...
You're gonna put a knife in my back?
I'm the only reason you ever made it out of the ruins, he hisses.
Your best friend, your only friend, he shouts, his voice no longer resembling anything like it ever has. No whimsy, no naivety, just malice and cruelty.
Well, you know what? I've never been above betrayals either.
Clover's soul reaches out once more, holding fast in that moment with determination. Flowey attacks, but in the moments before Clover is struck, the world is brought back to the moment before. Flowey is now more bewildered than angry. A bigger attack now, one that he couldn't possibly dodge, and then... nothing. Vines spring around to choke Clover, and then...
vines spring up from above and below him to tear him apart, and then... bullets in an insane, undodgeable patterns fly around him, and then...
Flowey stares. He tries to escape, and then... Flowey stares. Defeated. Then, suddenly, His face contorts into a manic smile.
I hate you! Every second that passes when I'm with you is more miserable than the last, and it's always been that way!
Flowey's voice and face only growing more and more manic with each word that passes out of his mouth. It's as if it relieves pain that he's been feeling, like every moment before this was a facade that physically pained him to keep up, and only now, in what he knew were his final moments, could he feel the relief of tearing that facade down.
The only time I enjoyed myself was when I got to watch you die! Hundreds of deaths, endlessly gruesome, endlessly satisfying. When I look at you, I don't see a brave hero or whatever you pretend to be. All I see are those beloved memories replaying over and over and over and over and over and over and over. You want to know the best part? Even if you kill me, I know how this ends. There's never been any escaping it. That castle might as well be a coffin because you're already dead.
Flowey is now deranged with shouting and laughter as Clover stands still with the gun in his hands.
You hear that? You're dead!
And Flowey crumbles into hideous and hateful laughter. It isn't Clover's soul, but his body which reacts first. With more conviction than he has ever mustered before, he blasts away at Flowey, unloading an entire chamber into him at once. First his eyes, then his mouth, then each petal one by one. All the while, Flowey still cackles like a demon as his body is torn to shreds by his own bullets. Finally, there's silence as the flower thuds to the floor unceremoniously. Clover blinks once, then holsters the weapon, making his way to the end of this journey. Boy, it's a good thing I don't have neighbors. Other than the rewrite that I proposed, this is how I wish Flowey was portrayed in Undertale. And what's crazy is, you can still have him be a loser virgin nihilist by doing so. The way you make Flowey as he's written interesting is by having him betray himself. In Undertale, he pretends to be your friend for like 1 second, and then never again. From that point on, he's just this painfully obvious about, we can both save like a video game, isn't that wacky? Haha, you're just like me, you're a killer just like me. But the problem with that is, it wears the surprise and gimmick of Flowey immediately. Especially for someone who played the pacifist run, because it's in the pacifist run that you learn that Flowey's Asriel without a shadow of a doubt. So if you did play the pacifist route and then the genocide route, all you get is Flowey is just a loser who doesn't care about anything. In Undertale Yellow, Flowey is presented as an ally. Again, the disclaimer at the start of this section, obviously, someone will know who and what Flowey is because they came from Undertale, but still, Flowey is presented as an ally that you probably shouldn't trust but don't really have a choice to. And for a while, he does a good job of keeping up appearances. He supports you, he gives you hints, he gives you little pep talks, and when you die, he genuinely acts like he wants what is best for you. But that just makes someone consider, why? Especially someone who knows him. Why would he be so nice? It's because he's selfish, he's cruel, he's a loser nihilist who thinks nothing matters but secretly that only he matters. The longer it takes to reveal that, the slower the burn is on the reveal. It's more satisfying to thwart him, and in the Genocide run especially, because it's in that one where Flowey is the most vocal to you on your journey. So when Clover is angry and shooty, Flowey sees that as a threat because he's losing control. The more powerful Clover becomes, the less he needs Flowey. The less he needs Flowey, the more annoyed and selfish Flowey becomes. Ultimately, he can't hold it anymore and spills it all at once. And what's really funny about the last thing that Flowey says is, he's right. He's correct. The Genocide one can't be canon because the Yellow Soul is in Undertale. No matter what Clover does from this moment, he kills Flowey. It won't matter. When Clover leaves, Flowey will reset everything to how it was and do it again and get the outcome he wants. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Clover leaves from where the fight had taken place, his eyes still shadowed by all that has transpired. He walks back into the hotel, where a shining manifestation of his determination waits for him. He anchors his soul there, so that should anything happen, he can return to it, just as Flowey had allowed him to before. He goes up the elevator towards the king and finally ends this. He gets to the roof of the hotel, which leads to the castle. Nothing here is of interest but the king himself. He goes to stand on a balcony and stare out over the kingdom. There he is, his soul whispers. Clover turns and continues down the path. Another elevator ride to where the king resides. He passes through a chapel of some kind. Upon the windows is the symbol of the Delta Rune, the symbol of hope for all monsters. He passes through, and before entering the doors to the king, checks the basement for what he knows he will find. There, in the basement, are 7 coffins, each marked with a symbol of a soul. 5 are already filled, and 1 is marked with the color of his own soul. His soul is speechless, already resolved at what must happen. Asgore will be given 1 chance more. 1 chance too many. He turns and walks into Asgore's hall, where he finds the king staring out a window towards his kingdom.
The underground is full of beauty, he begins sadly. Friends, families, hopes, dreams.
Or at least, it was. He frowns and turns from the window, pacing towards the center of the room in front of Clover.
Though valiantly they fought, nobody could stop you, could they?
Clover says nothing, his soul only bubbling with justice as Asgore continues.
I had hoped this day wouldn't come. Retaliation was inevitable, but I believed we could handle it, as we always have.
He turns to look away from Clover.
My dear friends, I am sorry.
Turning back to Clover, but refusing to make eye contact, he speaks, now directly to the boy.
I know why you're here, but I'm afraid it's too late. Your goal is out of reach. Monsterkind's plight is not something I take pride in, but it is a conflict not of our making.
Clover's soul ignites. Asgore had failed his chance. This was his end, here and now.
One thing is certain, however. Your violence has ensured this war never to end. Many more of both our kinds will perish because of this day. Such is the path you chose, Asgore laments.
He turns away again, as if at his shoulder came a voice with an unpleasant thought that he had to address.
The unfortunate truth of the matter is,
he sighed dejectedly, turning back towards Clover and lowering his head,
your fate was sealed the moment you entered my kingdom.
He brandishes a weapon, a massive trident which glows red with determination.
We will rebuild, and with your soul, we will be free. Goodbye.
And in that moment, Clover's soul is summoned beside him, intercepting the trident thrown at him, and as the trident collides with the soul, the weapon shatters to pieces, the soul remaining completely unscathed. Clover, no. Justice would not be stopped so easily. Asgore watched in horrid fascination as the small human soul began to resonate with unfathomable power. Clover closes his eyes, feeling the anguish, the torment, the tears, the horror, the pain, the agony, the unending despair caused to humanity and monsters alike, all at the hands of this one creature before him, which did not even have the decency to repent for his sins. He thinks of Dalv, the sheriff, Saroba, and Martlet. How their lives could have been different if not for the folly of this pathetic King Asgore, who even when brought face to face with justice, would not take accountability for what he has done. Clover's soul brimmed with justice, more than he had ever felt, and he knew in the milliseconds it took to open his eyes, what would come next was no less than what this horrid creature deserved. His eyes opened, and from his soul came a blast of energy so powerful and so concentrated, Clover wondered if you could have even seen it from the surface. Asgore's body disintegrated like glass, pulverized into a fine mist, and thrown into a tornado, until there was nothing left but his quivering soul. The throne was smashed, the room left with a line of blackened flowers and rubble in the direction of the blast. Clover put his soul back into himself and collected his prize, his key out of this wretched place. Clover steps to the barrier, and by his sides, from the ground, are the 5 souls he had come here to save, each one nothing more than a colored heart. The containers opened. The souls, lifting from their imprisonment, hovered beside Clover as he stares out into the sunlight. He takes one last deep breath and leaves the underground forever. His mission accomplished. He has saved the human souls, and he has dispensed justice. And that is how you do a Genocide run. The only thing that sucks about it, as I mentioned, is that it can't be canon. This cannot be how the story ends because the fallen child saves all of monsterkind, including Asgore. If this could be canon, it would be a fantastic and deeply moving story about justice and mercy. A tale as old as time, a coming-of-age story for a young boy who is faced with a daunting task, twisted into something morbidly righteous. A story of how justice alone is not what solves problems. The knowledge of good and evil is not what redeems a person, but rather their willingness to accept evil with good. Clover is justified in his quest, and wields justice against those who would do the same against him. But, unfortunately, this isn't the Clover which most embodies justice according to the rules of the game. I've heard some interesting takes on Undertale Yellow's story, like that Clover was, in a way, conditioned by Flowey after so many resets to be the way that he is, or that Clover is outright wrong for a Genocide run from the start, and it's a commentary on the flawed logic of might makes right. I think there are a lot of ways to interpret the story of Undertale Yellow, and I fully consider that to be a testament of how well and full the story was written. How many ways could a person interpret the story of Undertale's Genocide run? How many different ways can you say the original fallen child was super evil and it's the player who sides with them, not the child of the story? And really, that's what I'm making this video for, to highlight and explore what makes a story like this great. The idea of a Genocide run is fascinating because it has the potential to make the player question the morality and nature of something as permanent and horrible as taking another's life. When handled with no subtlety or nuance like Undertale, it just comes off as edgy and naive, but when given context and an actual story, you're left with something that really sticks with you. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this longer form narrative type content, and if you did, subscribe and leave a like please. Let me know your thoughts on everything. I figure people might have some things to say about this, so if there's enough discourse, I might make a response video to everything. In the meantime, I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.